Chapter 104. He washed his hands clean and didn't pay much attention to the bloodstains on his body. There wasn't a lot of blood. When he was doing other things, Lien Baoqing was already dead and his heart had stopped beating. Therefore he didn't spit out much blood. Most of the blood was on his hands. There were also some other bloodstains. After all, he had a wound on his buttocks. It wouldn't make sense to say that it was smeared on his hands. Ren Baqin filled his water bag with water. The stream water in this world was relatively clean. Of course, he couldn't do anything if it wasn't clean. After that, he went back along the original path. He wanted to see who found the corpses and what conclusions they would draw. It was impossible to find him in a short period of time. After all, he wasn't strong enough to kill people. The others had never seen a gun or a grenade before. He wouldn't use a grenade unless he had no other choice. As for the gun, it would be fine as long as he didn't find the missing bullet. The wounds had already been damaged by him. Ren Baqin had already tried his best to hide himself, and he couldn't do any more than that. If he had enough time, he would rather hide the two corpses. After a day, they would be eaten by wild beasts and no clues would be found. Ren Baqin thought it would be easy to find his way back. However, he couldn't find his way back even after walking for a long time. When he was running, he didn't pay attention to the surrounding scenery. This forest was huge. He almost got bitten by a snake before he could find his way back. It was easy for him to go down the mountain. However, it would be difficult for him to find a place in the forest. After going around in circles, Ren Baqin found his way back to the stream. He looked down at the soil beside the stream and searched from bottom to top. Many animals would come to the stream to drink water. In particular, places with many animals would leave footprints. This was common knowledge. Ren Baqin found a place with many paw prints. He wasn't sure if it was left by a wolf or a feline. He found a suitable tree nearby and climbed it. Now he just had to wait for those animals to come to drink water. If he was lucky and encountered a bay, he could go down the mountain. In any case, Ren Baqin was trying his luck. It would be great if he could encounter one. If he didn't, he wouldn't be allowed to go down the tree. He would wait until tomorrow morning. After staying in the tree for a while, Ren Baqin thought of something. There was a small bottle in his bag. It was given to him by Tai Dao in the morning. It was said to be able to attract wild beasts within a certain range. If he threw this thing out, would it attract the mountain wolves in the bay? However, Ren Baqin hesitated for a while before putting the bottle back into his waist pouch. This thing was too risky. If it attracted wild beasts like the wild boar, it would be his turn to be unlucky. Ren Baqin stayed in the tree. Not far away, Wu Fang was hesitating whether he should think of a way to chase Ren Baqin down from the tree. The Empress had instructed Ren Baqin to make him move if he were to find a place to hide. However, Ren Baqin's current position was overlooking the river, and it could be said that he was preparing to hunt. This made Ren Baqin somewhat uncertain. He subconsciously touched his chest and arms. The wounds on his body made him make up his mind. At this moment, his ears suddenly twitched and he concealed his aura. The sound of footsteps could be heard nearby, and it wasn't just one. After a while, Ren Baqin heard the sound of someone walking in the forest. He held his breath. In a minute or two, the two men came out of the woods to the river. A man and a woman. They were aboriginals. The man walked around the riverside and nodded. "This is it. Let's wait here. We should be able to gain something." "You're not going deeper?" the woman asked. "I can't snatch it from them, so I won't waste my energy. Furthermore, I saw traces left behind by a black fatty nearby. It looks like it's not small, so it's reasonable if we manage to hunt it," the man said. Both of them were about 16 or 17 years old. The man was tall and carried a pair of hammers in his hands. In other words, two iron blocks that were the size of cantaloupes were equipped with handles. The woman was full of heroic spirit. She carried a longbow on her back and a dagger on her waist. Ren Baqin was slightly stunned when he heard their conversation. There were actually people who thought highly of this place like him. However, after thinking about it, it was normal. He had learned this knowledge from television. And these aboriginals were much better at hunting than him. It was impossible that they didn't know about it. However, what kind of animal was the black fatty that they were talking about? According to the man's tone, it should be another name for a rather powerful wild beast. It seemed like the two of them had the same idea. Should he show himself? Ren Baqin thought again. He couldn't possibly keep hiding here, right? If he was discovered by the other party sooner or later, he might as well greet them first. Furthermore, it definitely wouldn't be dangerous to meet aboriginals. When Ren Baqin thought of this, he called out softly, "The two of you." "Who's there?" The two of them turned around abruptly. "It's you?" After seeing Ren Baqin, the two of them spoke in unison. I have been here for a while. When I saw the two of you coming over, I felt that I should greet you, Rinpoche said. Since you were here first, let's change places, the man immediately said. You don't have to change places. I only want a bay. The rest are yours, Rinpoche immediately said. He actually hoped that the two of them would stay here. That way he would be much safer. As he spoke, he slid down from the tree and walked to the two of them. Only then did he realize that the two of them looked very similar. It seemed like they were brother and sister. The two of you. Rinpoche nodded at them. The two of them first looked at the crossbow in Rinpoche's hands before asking, "What's a bay?" It's a wolf with short front legs and a wolf pack. It's different from ordinary wolves, Rinpoche explained. He had only heard of the word bay before. He didn't know what it looked like exactly. It should be a wolf with short legs. The woman suddenly understood. There are wolf footprints here. However, short-legged wolves are rare. We might not meet them. It doesn't matter. It's best if we can meet them. It doesn't matter if we don't. It's fate that we met in this forest. Let's team up, Rinpoche said. The two of them didn't mind Rinpoche's suggestion. Anyway, Rinpoche didn't want other animals. The two of them only wanted to get something to report back. If he could hit that black fatty, that would naturally be the best. How do I address the two of you? Rinpoche asked again. Quan Yonglin. Quan Yongha. The two of them said. The man was Quan Yonglin and the woman was Quan Yongha. Rinpoche. I know you, Deputy Rin. I met you this afternoon. I heard Gujio mention you before. Quan Yonglin said. His attitude was like he was talking to a stranger. He wasn't hostile, but he wasn't enthusiastic either. This was normal and Rinpoche didn't mind. What's the relationship between Gujio and Gu Shaoqing? Rinpoche asked. Previously he met Gu Shou. Without asking, he knew that he was Gu Daxiong's biological son. When the two of them mentioned Gujio, Rinpoche felt that he might be Gu Daxiong's nephew. He's Gu Shaoqing's second son. Quan Yonglin's words confirmed Rinpoche's suspicions. After the two of them met, Rinpoche asked again, "What are the two of you going to do? Are you going to wait here?" The two of us will go to the other side of the river. If there's any prey that we fancy, we'll make our move, Quan Yonglin said. There was a big rock at the other side of the river. It was about 3 meters tall. It was a good place. Chapter 105. Rinpoche walked to the bottom of the tree, but he wasn't in a hurry to climb it. He turned around and looked at the two of them. The two of them leaped over the 2-meter-wide stream and landed on top of the huge rock. Rinpoche couldn't help but feel envious every time he saw their skills. Rinpoche suppressed his envy when he thought that he would be able to exchange the martial arts manual with Du Chang Kong and practice it himself. Another thing that made Rinpoche envious was that the space on top of the rock was very big and it was much more comfortable to stay there. However, it seemed that the two of them didn't really like him. Rinpoche turned around and climbed the tree. Just as he turned around and was about to climb, he heard a hissing sound above his head. He looked up and saw a snake as thick as a bowl looking at him with its tongue sticking out. Rinpoche was shocked when he suddenly saw a snake above his head. He had experienced a lot this afternoon and could more or less control his emotions. He took 2 steps back, and when he raised his crossbow and was about to shoot, he realized that it wasn't just one snake. There were a few snakes crawling on top of the tree. The thick ones were as thick as a cup and the thin ones were as thick as 2 fingers. When he was on the tree just now, he didn't realize there were snakes nearby. However, a few minutes after he came down from the tree, they had already occupied his place. Rinpoche took a few steps back and the snake no longer paid attention to him. However, Rinpoche wasn't willing to let the nest that he had found be occupied just like that. This tree was the most suitable one in the vicinity. He raised his crossbow, aimed at the biggest snake and pulled the trigger. The biggest snake was immediately nailed to the tree trunk and twisted its body in pain. Another arrow was shot at the curled-up snake. The snake's head was raised high as if it was struggling. Rinpoche shot the next arrow at a snake not far away. The arrow penetrated the back of the snake's head and nailed it to the tree trunk. After nailing 2 snakes to the tree, the other snakes naturally felt the danger and started to crawl on the tree trunk. One of them swam to the ground and went into the forest. Rinpoche looked at the few snakes that were scurrying around. He didn't make any more moves because he realized a problem. These snakes wouldn't die immediately after being nailed to the tree. The tree was only so big. With a few snakes nailed to it, he didn't dare to go up. Rinpoche pondered for a moment. He turned his head and looked around to find a tree that he could hide behind. The tree couldn't be too short as it wouldn't be safe if it was too short. They couldn't be too tall or too thick or they wouldn't be able to climb up. The view should be better. Of these conditions, the tree that had just been occupied was the one that was the most suitable. While Rinpoche was looking around, he suddenly felt as if someone was looking at him from behind. He turned around abruptly and pointed his crossbow at the other party. In the next second, Rinpoche's face turned pale as he turned around and ran. "Help!" Rinpoche shouted like a little girl who was about to be molested to attract the attention of Kuan Yonglin and Kuan Yonghe. At the same time he ran to the stream, jumped into it and trudged to the other side. Following behind him was a saber-toothed tiger with brown fur and fine stripes. It looked at Rinpoche with ridicule in its eyes as it walked out of the forest unhurriedly. Rinpoche jumped into the stream and discovered a big problem. The depth of the water seemed to be knee-deep, but after a few steps the water had already reached his waist. The amount of strength needed to walk forward was much more than he had expected. With great difficulty he climbed up to the shore. That saber-toothed tiger had also reached the side of the stream. He reckoned that the saber-toothed tiger would be able to reach him with just a pounce from the distance of 2 meters. However, the saber-toothed tiger's gaze wasn't on Rinpoche. Instead, it was looking at the top of the rock. It growled and slowly retreated. On the rock, Kuan Yonglin didn't care about the saber-toothed tiger. However, Kuan Yonghe drew his bow and aimed at it, making it feel threatened. Without waiting for the saber-toothed tiger to retreat, Kuan Yonghe shot an arrow. In any case, Rinpoche didn't see anything. That saber-toothed tiger let out a blood-curdling scream as the arrow pierced through its hind leg and pierced into the ground. Just now, when that arrow was shot, the saber-toothed tiger suddenly pounced forward. Otherwise its back would have been pierced through. After suffering this injury, the saber-toothed tiger no longer retreated. With a furious roar, it ran to the side of the stream and pounced over. At this moment, the saber-toothed tiger's eyes were filled with madness and ruthlessness. Fortunately, he wasn't the saber-toothed tiger's target. Otherwise, he wouldn't even be able to run away. "Hey!" Kuan Yonglin stood on the rock and laughed. He swung the 2 hammers that were the size of honeydew melons in his hands and leaped down. The 2 hammers carried an enormous power as they smashed towards the saber-toothed tiger's head. The saber-toothed tiger was originally prepared to pounce on the rock. After seeing Kuan Yonglin's power, it immediately shifted its body to the side. Soon after, it opened its bloody mouth and bit towards Kuan Yonglin's waist. Just by looking at its mouth of sharp teeth, one would know what would happen if one was bitten. At the same time, its pair of front claws slapped towards Kuan Yonglin's body. This action was similar to a pounce. After running for more than 10 meters, Rinpoche turned his head and saw this scene. He felt that if the saber-toothed tiger was facing him, he would definitely be dead meat. However, Kuan Yonglin didn't panic in the slightest. He flipped his hand in midair and smashed the saber-toothed tiger's face with his hammer. Bang! The saber-toothed tiger let out a miserable howl. Normally, if such a big metal hammer were to smash the face, it would definitely be smashed into pieces. Furthermore, Rinpoche understood the strength of the aboriginals very well. He had seen the scene of a person being sent flying for 7 to 8 meters and even penetrating the wall with just a kick. It was even more impossible for a son of a high-ranking official like Kuan Yonglin to be weak. However, what made him astonished was that the saber-toothed tiger actually only let out a miserable howl. A few of its teeth were knocked out. Following which, it became even more ferocious and smashed Kuan Yonglin away. Was this saber-toothed tiger made of iron? Was this really a saber-toothed tiger? Wasn't it a Decepticon? Rinpoche took in a breath of cold air when he saw this round of confrontation between the 2 of them. He was frightened. When this saber-toothed tiger was locked up in the beast park, he didn't think much of it. He didn't expect it to be so ferocious. Not to mention other things, its ability to withstand attacks was already somewhat terrifying. Kuan Yonglin was sent flying and fell into the small stream. The saber-toothed tiger's eyes were bloodshot, filled with brutality and madness. Following that, it pounced over. Just as Kuan Yonglin fell into the small stream, he kicked off the water with both of his legs. He raised his hammer high and smashed it towards the saber-toothed tiger once again. He gave off an indomitable feeling. Even if it was a mountain in front of him, he would still smash it violently. Bang! Kuan Yonglin was sent flying again. The saber-toothed tiger also let out a miserable howl as it was smashed onto the ground. This time the iron hammer directly smashed onto its head. The eye that was slightly injured just now was directly smashed into pieces. Now both Kuan Yonglin and the saber-toothed tiger's eyes were bloodshot. They pounced on each other again. The saber-toothed tiger was beaten crazy. It was truly crazy. As for Kuan Yonglin, Rinpoche felt that he might have sand in his eyes. You aren't even injured, why are your eyes so bloodshot? The two of them collided once again. However, the saber-toothed tiger suddenly turned around and whipped Quan Yonglin with its tail, sending him flying away. Its tailbone was also ruthlessly smashed by Quan Yonglin's hammer. It let out another miserable howl. Now, Rinpoche didn't know who looked more like a wild beast, Quan Yonglin or this saber-toothed tiger. In any case, the feeling that Quan Yonglin gave Rinpoche was, I don't care about dodging, tricks, or techniques. Don't be a coward. Just do it. Swing the hammer and smash. During the fourth confrontation, Quan Yonglin's two hammers whistled through the air and smashed onto the saber-toothed tiger's head. The saber-toothed tiger groaned before it was smashed back onto the ground again. Its body twitched slightly. It might have been smashed to death. At the very least, it had a severe concussion. It was reckoned that even a Decepticon would be crippled by these two hammers, let alone a saber-toothed tiger. Quan Yonglin flew out once again. After rolling on the ground, he leaped to the side of the saber-toothed tiger and smashed the saber-toothed tiger's head with his iron hammer. Bang! 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 Rinpoche looked at Quan Yonglin as if he was forging iron. The ground was also trembling. Rinpoche felt apprehensive. Chapter 106. Seeing Quan Yonglin's crazed look, Rinpoche was alarmed and jumpy. On the other hand, Quan Yongha, who was on the rock, acted as if he didn't see anything. After Quan Yonglin jumped down, he sat there in a daze. In the end, Quan Yonglin could no longer see anything on the ground except for a puddle of Laogan Ma. Quan Yonglin finally stopped, walked to the stream and threw the hammer into the water. Then he jumped in and washed the flesh off his body. After everything was done, he picked up the hammer and stood in the stream. He shouted at Quan Yongha, "Let's go. The saber-toothed tiger is dead. The other animals will smell it from afar. They won't come anymore. Can you not make it so disgusting next time?" Quan Yongha said with a look of disgust, but he still jumped down from the rock. This thing is quite strong. I couldn't hold back for a moment." Quan Yonglin laughed. "It's not that you can't hold back, right? I have never heard of anyone who can't hold back and still wants to whip a corpse and smash it into minced meat." Rinpoche cursed in his heart. He stood far away and didn't say a word. "I'm afraid there won't be any animals coming to this riverside today. You should go somewhere else," Quan Yonglin shouted at Rinpoche again. Rinpoche nodded vigorously. In any case, he wouldn't get close to Quan Yonglin anymore. Initially, the two of them looked quite good, but when they started fighting, it was too crazy. If others were by his side, they naturally wouldn't be afraid. But if they were to get too close, they would probably be killed by his hammer. Just now, with bloodshot eyes, Rinpoche didn't dodge or evade the saber-toothed tiger's attack. He didn't even let the saber-toothed tiger off and even wanted to smash the saber-toothed tiger into minced meat. This really terrified Rinpoche. Rinpoche was a good citizen. Although his hands were stained with 2 lives, he was still a good citizen. Rinpoche's weak body didn't dare to get too close to such a person. After the two of them left, Rinpoche sat on the ground and thought about it. He felt that he had been cheated. Initially, he was having a good time here. However, his old nest was occupied and they even killed a saber-toothed tiger. Judging from what they said, the other animals probably wouldn't dare to come here today. If he wanted to hunt, he would have to find another place. It had always been dangerous for him to wander around in this forest. After pondering for a while, he felt that it was better for him to stay here. His goal wasn't to hunt, but to find a place to stay. It didn't matter even if he had to stay out all night as long as he could return safely. As for hunting, whoever wanted to do it could do it. After watching the battle just now, Rinpoche had a deeper understanding of how dangerous this forest was. Just like the saber-toothed tiger just now, its body was at least 3 meters long or even 4 meters long. It was only slightly smaller than the wild boar, but it was almost as tall as him when it stood on all fours. Its strength and resilience were even more astonishing. At the very least, it didn't do much when it was hit in the face. It was only after a few consecutive hits on its head that it lost the ability to fight. Rinpoche reckoned that he wouldn't be able to do anything even if he used his pistol. If it wasn't for Quan Yonglin's presence, he would have been in trouble. The saber-toothed tiger wasn't a human, it wouldn't stupidly let him stuff a grenade into its mouth. Originally, he thought that a pistol would suffice. But now, he realized that a pistol was only useful against people who were not very strong. Regardless of whether it was the wild boar or the saber-toothed tiger, a pistol would not be of much use. Not only against wild beasts, but even against Quan Yonglin, it might not be of much use. If Rinpoche didn't remember wrongly, the strength of a tiger's palm strike was at least 1 ton. Just by looking at the size and strength of this saber-toothed tiger, One could tell that it wasn't any weaker than the tigers on Earth. However, when it hit Kuan Yonglin, it only sent him flying. After rolling on the ground, he was able to stand up and didn't seem to be affected at all. Furthermore, the saber-toothed tiger's claws only left a few shallow wounds on Kuan Yonglin's body. This kind of result also demonstrated Kuan Yonglin's physical defense ability. His body was really too tough. He was afraid that if this pistol hit him, the bullet would at most be stuck in his muscles. Unless it hit a vital point, it wouldn't cause much damage to the opponent. Furthermore, the opponent wasn't a blockhead. His speed was much faster than Rinpochien's. If Rinpochien really used a pistol to meet someone like Kuan Yonglin, he would definitely be the one to die. If such a situation really happened, Rinpochien felt that the situation would be him shooting, the opponent would throw the hammer at him, the opponent would be bitten by a mosquito and Rinpochien would die. Everything would be over. It might still be possible to use a rifle as the velocity of the bullet was 2 times higher than a pistol. If it was used against an ordinary person at close range, there wouldn't be much of a difference. However, if it was used against people in this world, there would be a huge difference. If he were to use a rifle, he reckoned that the opponent would be turned into a hornet's nest after a round of bullets. Rinpochien sat there and pondered for a while. He turned his head to look at that huge rock and pondered how to climb up. He had seen this rock before, but he felt that it would be very difficult for him to climb up. Therefore, he obediently stayed on the tree. It was easy for Kuan Yonglin and Kuan Yonghe to climb up, but Rinpochien didn't have any skill points for climbing. He circled around the rock twice. This rock was about 3 meters high and there wasn't any place for him to climb. Finally, Rinpochien took a few steps back. Then he sprinted and used his foot to climb up the rock. However, only his palm could reach the top of the rock. It was an inclined surface and he immediately slid down. Rinpochien tried a few more times in different directions, but all of them ended in failure. Rinpochien had to admit that when he watched videos, it was easy for others to climb. When it was his turn, he realized that it looked easy, but in reality it was hell. Sigh. Rinpochien sighed. He had no choice but to continue walking upstream along the stream. At the same time, he looked around to see if there was a suitable place to hide. Although Kuan Yonglin said that there wouldn't be any animals coming, he wouldn't even have a place to hide if an animal came. At this moment, the sun was already setting. There wasn't much time left before the sky turned dark. Rinpochien felt that he had to find a place to hide before the sky turned dark. There were many predators in the forest at night. In addition, his line of sight was too short, so it was even more dangerous than during the day. If possible, Rinpochien hoped to find a relatively small crevice, the kind where large animals couldn't enter, to hide for the night. In the end, he didn't see the place he was looking for along the way. However, there were a few trees that were suitable for him to hide in. Rinpochien walked to the nearest tree and threw more than 10 rocks at it. After confirming that there weren't any snakes, he climbed up the tree himself to take a look. Only then did he feel relieved and returned to the ground. He walked around and saw the bushes moving. Rinpochien held his breath. A moment later, a white head popped out. When it saw Rinpochien, it immediately bared its teeth. Without any hesitation, Rinpochien raised his hand and shot an arrow at the creature's chest. Then Rinpochien immediately ran. It was actually a bay beast again. Why were there so many of them in the forest? Rinpochien ran all the way to the side of the stream. Only then did 4 bay beasts chase after him like mad dogs. They ran all the way while drooling. It seemed like they were treating Rinpochien as their dinner. Rinpochien had the same idea as them. He took out a gun from his back with his right hand and fired more than 10 shots consecutively. In between, he even had the energy to change the magazine. Chapter 107. Rinpochien started a fire and roasted one of the babae's legs. He even used stones to build a circle in the stream and soaked the other leg in it. The smell of blood would be washed away by the stream. This leg would be left here for tomorrow's breakfast. As for the other corpses, they were thrown far away to prevent the smell of blood from attracting other animals. He was now holding on to the idea of going down the mountain the next morning. As for the bay and the like, they could go to hell. After witnessing that battle, the danger level of the wild beasts in this world skyrocketed in his heart. I'm not Ultraman, I can't beat little monsters. At this point in time, the sky had already started to darken. The bonfire by the stream flickered brightly, and he could hear the roars of beasts in the distant forest. Rinpochien had a strange feeling in his heart. Unfortunately, it wasn't the feeling of being close to nature or anything like that. It was just eerie, terrifying, and full of danger. He used a knife to make a few cuts on the bay beast's leg. Then he sprinkled some seasonings on it before turning it over and roasting it. After a while, the fragrance began to spread far away. Wu Fong, who was on a tree not far away, rubbed his belly and took a bite of the berry in his hand. These were the few that he had picked nearby. They were very sour and barely enough to fill his stomach. Smelling the fragrance in the distance, he began to feel unbalanced. Rinpoche was obviously so weak, yet nothing happened to him after he wandered around in the forest for an entire afternoon. After killing 2 people, he was still able to strut around and roast meat. Not only was he injured, but he also couldn't tell anyone about it. It was too embarrassing. Moreover, he had to watch the other party eat meat while he ate berries. Thinking up to here, the 5 parties felt dejected. There was really no one to reason with. Although Wu Fong's face was mournful, his hand suddenly grabbed out like lightning. When he returned, there was already a snake that was as thick as 3 fingers. He exerted force from the back and the body of the snake that was originally coiled around his arm fell down. He took out a knife and cut open the snake's head, skinned it, and took out its internal organs. Then he stuffed the tail into his mouth and bit down, imagining that it was barbecued meat. As the aroma drifted out, Rinpoche felt that he was getting hungrier. He stared at the meat on the bonfire, waiting to eat his fill. Today could be said to be a tough day for an ordinary person like him. If possible, he hoped that there would never be a next time. Unfortunately, in the foreseeable future, it would be difficult for him to rest well tonight. After all, even if they were in the trees, there were still many dangers in this forest. The tree could only help him avoid some danger, but it was not a place where he could rest easy. The sound of footsteps could be heard, and a figure emerged from the darkness. Rinpoche immediately pointed his gun at the figure and asked, "Who is it?" "Deputy Rin? It's great to see your true self." Ning Kaichen, who was dressed in rags, cheered. His eyes were brimming with tears when he saw Rinpoche. "Why is it you again?" Rinpoche couldn't help but think. Rinpoche didn't know what to say since he was able to encounter them twice in such a huge forest. He had always suspected that Ning Kaichen was pretending to be weak. However, Ning Kaichen had always shown that he was as weak as him. Furthermore, Ning Kaichen's body was covered with bloodstains from fighting in the forest and his clothes were torn into several pieces. From the looks of it, the wild boar was chasing it quite miserably. But at this time he was still in the forest and did not go down the mountain. "Why didn't you go down the mountain?" Rinpoche asked. Generally speaking, these young masters would only come here to experience the scenery and would go down the mountain to rest at night. "Just now, I saw a beautiful scenery. Due to my greed, I looked at it for a while longer and couldn't find the way down the mountain," Ning Kaichen said shyly. "Deputy Ren, if you are interested, I can bring you there tomorrow morning. Watching the sunrise and sunset there is like being in a fairyland." Rinpoche wasn't interested in watching the sunrise and sunset. He was only interested in going down the mountain and sleeping peacefully in his bed. "However, it's great to see Deputy Ren." Ning Kaichen cheered again. "I initially thought I would have to starve tonight. In the end, I saw the fire from afar and thought that it was fate that we met in the wilderness. I came over to ask for some food. I didn't expect to see Deputy Ren here." Rinpoche continued to roast and knead the wild boar. He didn't dislike Ning Kaichen, who loved to brag. After all, Ning Kaichen was a person who was easy to get along with. In Lan City, Rinpoche didn't let him down and didn't feel that Ning Kaichen would harm him. Furthermore, he felt that it was good to have a companion on such a night. After all, he was a social animal. Even if he didn't like to gather with others, it didn't mean that he was willing to stay alone in the wilderness. Even if he listened to Ning Kaichen brag, he would feel better for the night. As for whether Ning Kaichen was pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger, Rinpoche didn't really care. Looking at the babe leg that was about to be cooked, Rinpoche felt that it would be difficult for the 2 of them to eat it. It didn't matter even if they weren't full. It was better not to roast the leg that was soaking in the stream as it was too troublesome. Now that the sky was so dark, it was better to finish eating and return to the tree. The 2 of them impatiently waited for a long time before Rinpoche brought the babe leg back. The aroma that assailed their nostrils made them want to eat it immediately. After waiting for the babe leg to cool down a little, the 2 of them started to tear off the meat from the leg and stuffed it into their mouths. It tasted like dog meat and was very fragrant. After a while, the entire leg was in their stomachs. Both of them laid on the pebbles beside the stream and sighed comfortably. "Deputy Ren, your cooking skills are really good." Ning Kaichen lay at the side and exclaimed in admiration. Rinpoche smiled and didn't reply. It wasn't that his cooking skills were good, it was that the seasoning was good. Furthermore, the meat of the animals in this world was better than that on Earth. The giant goat that they ate previously was one of them. After lying down for a few minutes, the roars of beasts could still be heard from afar. Some were near while some were far away. The nearest one was about 300 to 400 meters away. Rinpoche sat up from the ground and said, "I'm going to go up the tree to rest." After finishing his sentence, he added some branches to the fire. He hoped that the fire would burn for a longer time. He turned around and walked to the bottom of the tree. Rinpoche looked up and immediately cursed, "Damn you." He saw that there were a few more snakes on the tree. Rinpoche couldn't help but wonder if he had the physique to attract snakes. Wherever he stayed, the snakes would crawl. Furthermore, they would specifically wait for him to leave before occupying his place. "What's wrong with my uncle?" Ning Kaichen asked with a perplexed look. "Your uncle is a good person," Rinpoche replied without turning his head. He turned his head to look for other trees that he could rest on. Just now he saw a few trees. Ignoring Ning Kaichen who was behind him, Rinpoche walked back and found another tree that was suitable for him to hide in. In the end, when he reached the bottom of the tree, he heard a hissing sound. Rinpoche was extremely depressed. Why was he so unlucky? Why did the snakes choose whichever tree he liked? "I'm not Su Xian. Why do you have to do this?" Chapter 108. On the way back, Rinpoche noticed that there were snakes on the few trees that he had noticed earlier. This left Rinpoche speechless. At this moment, the light from the fire couldn't reach his position. Rinpoche looked at the surrounding pitch-black forest. He didn't know whether it was a bird or a beast that was making strange sounds. After standing there for a while, he turned around, walked back to the bonfire and sat down. Looking at Ning Kaichen who was beside him, Rinpoche thought of the big rock from before. However, Ning Kaichen's shoulders were only about 1.5 meters tall. Rinpoche reckoned that he wouldn't be able to climb up by stepping on him. After thinking about it, Rinpoche gave up and decided to stay here. The sky had already turned dark, and it was estimated to be around 9 o'clock. It wasn't suitable to wander around in the forest now. Howl? A wolf howled from afar, and the forest became even more eerie at night. Both of them sat by the bonfire in a daze. Feeling bored, Rinpoche chatted with Ning Kaichen. Most of the time, Ning Kaichen was talking while Rinpoche was listening. Ning Kaichen developed his long-winded style and spoke eloquently and eloquently. "Do you think there are ghosts in this world?" Rinpoche suddenly asked curiously. Previously, Ning Kaichen talked about what he had seen and heard along the way. There were many supernatural things, but Rinpoche didn't know whether they were true or not. In any case, he felt like he was talking nonsense. Now both of them were in the wilderness, guarding a bonfire, listening to the howls of wild beasts in the distance. Suddenly Rinpoche thought of this question. Ning Kaichen put on a serious face and replied, "Of course there are. When I came here I passed by a village. There was no one there and all the doors and windows were tightly shut. I knocked from the end of the village to the end, but no one opened the door. When the sky turned dark, all the villagers opened the door and came out. The whole village was very lively and all the adults and children were there. In order to welcome a foreigner like me, they even lit a bonfire in the middle of the village just like the one we have now but much bigger. Then they took out all the food they had at home, and the whole village gathered around the bonfire, singing and dancing. From their clothes I can tell that their families aren't rich. Their children run around naked but they still took out all the food they had at home." When Ning Kaichen said this, the bonfire reflected in his eyes seemed to be the scene of that night. His face was filled with nostalgia and a smile. They were really enthusiastic and the wine they brewed was also very strong. "I fell asleep after drinking half a bowl. When he woke up the next day he found himself lying in the middle of the village. Everything around him had been cleaned up. And the villagers all shut their doors and did not come out. I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't find anyone so I left the village. After walking for half a day they found another village and asked for water. They also asked about what happened in that village. Guess what? Ning Kaichen turned around and asked Rinpoche. "Everyone in that village is dead?" Rinpoche guessed. Combining the information from before and after, this should be the case, right? Ning Kaichen nodded his head vigorously. "Yes, you guessed it right. That village had been wiped out by a plague decades ago. The village I went to later was built by the people who escaped from that village." "Is this a story?" Rinpoche didn't believe it. Rinpoche had heard this kind of story 1,000 times. "I swear to the heavens that I experienced it personally." Ning Kaichen immediately swore. Rinpoche looked at him, turned his head away, lowered his head, and used a wooden stick to write and draw on the ground. These were words that he had learned in this world. He drew them for fun when he had nothing to do. He still didn't quite believe Ning Kaichen's words. This was because, in his impression, odes were the most unreliable thing. Of course, perhaps the people in this world took oaths very seriously, but he didn't feel much about it. Ning Kaichen continued, "After that, I specially went to the graveyard next to that village to pay my respects." Rinpoche didn't reply and he didn't say anything either. He just raised his head and looked at the starry sky. At this moment, other than the roars of the beasts in the distance, there was only the crackling sound of the bonfire in front of them. After a while Ning Kaichen poked his arm. Rinpoche looked up and saw that Ning Kaichen's expression was more serious than before. "Something is watching us." "Where? How do you know?" Rinpoche was puzzled. He turned his head and looked around. Very soon he knew how Ning Kaichen knew because he also saw something. More than 10 pairs of green eyes were glowing in the dark forest. Rinpoche slowly got up, raised his crossbow and asked in a low voice, "What is it?" "They are approaching us. We will know soon." Ning Kaichen did the same action as him. However, Rinpoche still had a crossbow in his hand. Ning Kaichen's hand was empty, so he directly pulled out a burning branch from the bonfire. Rinpoche was sweating profusely. Encountering wild beasts in the forest in the middle of the night wasn't just bad. What was worse was that it wasn't just one but a group of them. It was so dark and the two of them really didn't dare to run around. It was too dangerous and a single snake could kill them. Moreover, the two of them might not be able to outrun them. "Are they afraid of fire?" Rinpoche muttered to himself. Generally speaking, wild beasts were afraid of fire, and it was safer to stay near the bonfire. Furthermore, the bonfire was still blazing, and it gave him some peace of mind. "They are out." Following Ning Kaichen's words, the figures at the front were revealed. The first to come out were a few large huskies. Or rather, wild wolves. However, they really looked like them. It was just that they were too big. Their shoulder height was almost 1 meter and they were completely gigantic. Furthermore, the eyes of these wild wolves were filled with cruelty. They opened their mouths slightly, revealing their fangs. It seemed like they were going to treat the two of them as their dinner. "Ning Kaichen, if you have any tricks up your sleeves, quickly use them. There are only the two of us now, so don't pretend to be a pig to eat a tiger." Rinpoche looked at the wild wolves walking out of the forest one after another. His whole body shivered and he took out his gun with his other hand. Ning Kaichen asked with a serious face, "Deputy Rin, can't you deal with them? What do you think? Can't you tell that I have never practiced martial arts before?" Rinpoche replied unhappily, "I can't even defeat one of them and now it all depends on you. If you can't do it, both of us will be in the stomach of the wolves today." "I understand." Ning Kaichen nodded his head. Following which, he straightened his body, raised one of his hands, and pointed his 5 fingers toward the sky. He shouted, "Sword come." An inexplicable yet formidable aura rose from his body. Seeing Ning Kaichen's actions, Rinpoche was elated. This Ning Kaichen was indeed pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. With him around, it seemed like they would be safe tonight. Feeling elated, Rinpoche even had the mood to turn his head to look at Ning Kaichen's appearance. He had to admit that Ning Kaichen's appearance was pretty good. He had a standard pretty boy face, straightened his body, raised his arm and shouted, "Sword come." Excluding his ragged clothes, Rinpoche would give him 8 points for his appearance. After he killed this pack of wolves, Rinpoche would give him 2 points. 1 minute passed, 2 minutes passed, Ning Kaichen was still in that pose. Rinpoche was speechless. What's going on? Great Xiar is too far away from here, and the sword still needs to fly for a while. Chapter 109. Great Xia is too far away from here. The sword still has to fly for a while. Upon hearing this, Rinpoche felt as though 10,000 alpacas were galloping wildly in his heart. "Can't you defeat these wolves without a sword?" Rinpoche looked at Ning Kaichen, who was still in that pose, and said in a low voice with a hidden bitterness. As for the sword flying over from Great Xia, he felt that it was a fantasy story. However, it was already a critical juncture. He also felt that Ning Kaichen couldn't possibly be full of himself at this point in time, right? Ning Kaichen was still in the pose of grabbing the sky with one hand. Previously, Rinpoche felt that this pose was worth 8 points, but now he only wanted to give him a slap. "Deputy Rin, I have to trouble you to delay for a while. Without the sword, I am no different from an ordinary person." Ning Kaichen turned around and said to Rinpoche. Without the sword, he was no different from an ordinary person? Rinpoche really didn't know what kind of setting this was. However, he had no other choice now and could only ask, "How long will it take?" "According to the distance, it should be about the time it takes to drink 2 cups of tea," Ning Kaichen replied. "Damn you," Rinpoche cursed angrily. This was really a fraud. Rinpoche no longer cared about Ning Caichen's pose. He raised his crossbow and aimed at the opposite side. The wolves were getting closer. However, they weren't in a hurry to attack. The wolves at the back began to disperse and surround them. Rinpoche hesitated for a while. He didn't know whether to strike first and show the wolves how powerful they were, or to delay for as long as possible and wait for Ning Caichen. If he struck first, the other party might be vigilant and perhaps he could even injure a few wolves first. This way the pressure would be reduced. Otherwise, if the other party surrounded them and attacked at the same time, the two of them would probably be fed to the wolves. If he continued to wait, he would allow the other party to complete the encirclement. How long they could delay for would depend on the deterrent effect of the bonfire. Both methods had their pros and cons. For a moment Rinpoche didn't know what to do. However, he quickly clenched his teeth and forced himself to calm down. This wasn't the time to do nothing when you can't make a decision. At this moment, the nearest wolf was only about 20 meters away from him. He raised his hand, aimed, and immediately shot an arrow. Ow! The wolf at the front howled miserably as the arrow left a bloody wound on its body. Rinpoche hurriedly loaded the arrow and took aim again. While he was doing this, the wolves were a few meters closer. Another arrow shot out, this time hitting the chest of the other wolf, causing it to let out a blood-curdling screech. Looking at the length of the exposed arrow shaft, it was only 4 or 5 centimeters deep. It seemed that the wolf didn't lose its ability to fight. After the 2 arrows were shot, the wolves became even more irritable. Seeing that the other wolves were surrounding him from both sides, Rinpoche aimed his pistol at them. He threw the crossbow on the ground with his other hand and took out a spare magazine from his bag. Pok, pok, pok. Under the night sky, the forest began to emit crisp and short gunshots. 2 wolves burst out with blood. At this moment, all the wolves began to be vigilant. They growled in a low voice and retreated a little, expanding the circle. Rinpoche was overjoyed. It seemed like he had done the right thing. As long as they didn't start cultivating immediately, it would be fine if they dragged it out for a while longer. The time taken to brew 2 cups of tea was about 10 minutes, and more than 2 minutes had already passed. She hoped that Ning Caichen would not stand her up again. Otherwise she would definitely kill him before she died. Rinpoche vigilantly looked at the surrounding wolves. As long as one of them came closer, he would immediately shoot at it, forcing the pack of wolves to retreat. However, even though a few wolves had suffered gunshot wounds, only one wolf fell to the ground and moaned weakly. That wolf had coincidentally been shot in the throat. As for the other wolves, even though their movements were affected after being shot, it didn't seem to be fatal. A few more minutes passed, and the sweat on Rinpoche's forehead didn't stop. These wolves were constantly probing him, and after a few minutes they started to become smarter. Once he raised his hand, they would jump to one side. How much longer? Rinpoche couldn't help but ask. 10 more minutes. Deputy Rin, hang in there. It's all up to you now. Not only your life but my life is also in your hands. Ning Caichen encouraged him. I don't need you to feed me chicken soup, Rinpoche couldn't help but whisper. At the same time he raised his hand and fired another shot. Their patience seems to be getting worse, Rinpoche said as he changed the magazine. He had already sensed that the pack of wolves was getting impatient. The surrounding wolves lowered their bodies and growled, giving Rinpoche the feeling that they were about to attack. Rinpoche clenched his teeth and took out a grenade. Even though he didn't want to use it, he was afraid that others would link him to Lien Baoqing's death. However, in the current situation he had already used up a magazine, and other than one wolf, the rest of the wolves were injured but not dead. There were a total of 13 wolves surrounding him. If they were to enter the palace together, he was afraid that he would be torn to pieces in an instant. Under such circumstances he could only rely on the grenade. Not only could it kill a few wolves but it could also scare them. As for the rest, he would think about it later. If he couldn't get past them now, there would be no future. Rinpoche, with a pistol and a grenade in his hand, was in a stalemate with those wolves for another minute. Every minute was like torture for him. There were a few times when he felt that those wolves would pounce on him and tear him to pieces. Seems like I really can't wait any longer, Rinpoche thought to himself. There were still 4 minutes left, and these wolves might pounce on him in the next second. It would be too late even if he wanted to throw the grenade. I'll risk it. It doesn't matter if I'm exposed, I have to get past this obstacle first. Rinpoche thought to himself and finally made up his mind. He placed the grenade at the side of his mouth, bit on the ring and exerted force. Following which, he threw the grenade to his left side more than 10 meters away. It landed near 3 wolves. Those wolves only paid attention to it at first, but soon after they ignored it. Ning Kaichen was on his left side. If those wolves pounced on him, Ning Kaichen would probably be the first to be attacked. Rinpochen placed all his hopes on Ning Kaichen, which was why he made such a decision. After throwing the grenade, Rinpochen covered his ears with one hand, slightly shrank his neck and counted in his heart. 1, 2, 3, 4, boom! The grenade exploded at the 5th count, setting off a mass of air waves. 2 wolves were directly blown away like ragged sacks. Their bodies were bleeding from head to toe, and it looked like they were about to die. There was another wolf that was slightly further away. Its body was also wounded and it fell to the ground, whimpering non-stop. The other wolves were shocked by the explosion and retreated with their tails between their legs. At the same time, the death of 2 wolves and the serious injury of 1 wolf shocked them and made them want to retreat. At this moment, Rinpochen couldn't care less about them because Ning Kaichen, who was beside him, was still in the same position and had collapsed. At that moment, Rinpochen cursed in his heart. "Big brother, I'm still counting on you. Don't let anything happen to you." At the same time, fresh blood flowed down from Ning Kaichen's head. Chapter 110. At this moment, Rinpochen really wanted to cry but had no tears. His biggest savior, his only hope of surviving for 10 minutes, had been knocked unconscious by his own grenade. What was going on? Didn't this grenade have a killing range of 5 to 10 meters? Ning Kaichen was about 14 to 15 meters away from the killing range. How could he be so unlucky? Rinpochen felt that everything was going wrong for him. Ning Kaichen was also a fraud. After posing for so long, he was actually knocked unconscious by a stray bullet. Where is your sword? Where's your demeanor as a master? Now, Rinpochen began to seriously consider whether these wolves would chase after him or directly drag Ning Kaichen away if he ran away. Sigh. Rinpochen finally sighed faintly. In the end, he was too soft-hearted and felt embarrassed to leave Ning Kaichen behind. Fortunately, the wolves seemed to be frightened and retreated far away. They howled softly from time to time as if they were communicating with each other. It seemed like he still had some buffer time. Only 1 wolf was still standing in its original spot, glaring fiercely at him. All the other wolves have retreated, but you're the only one who refuses to retreat. What kind of grudge do you have against me? Rinpochen looked at the wolf, raised his hand and aimed at it. Thump. The wolf fell to the ground. I haven't fired yet. What are you doing? Rinpochen carefully identified it for a long time before realizing that it was the one that he had shot with an anesthetic arrow at the beginning. It was just that the effects of the medicine were a little slow. He picked up the water bag and poured it on Ning Kaichen's head. A moment later, Ning Kaichen was awakened by the cold water. What just happened? Can you still use your sword? Rinpochen was speechless. It was a blessing in disguise that Ning Kaichen did not suffer a concussion. It was interrupted, but it shouldn't be too far from here. I'll summon it again. Ning Kaichen's head was still stained with blood. His current posture was like that of a martyr. He crawled up from the ground and continued to pose. He raised one hand to the sky and shouted, "Sword, come." Rinpochen heaved a sigh of relief. It was good that Ning Kaichen was fine. However, she was even more interested in Ning Kaichen's sword. It even has precision guidance? Furthermore, they had only flown here from Great Xia for 10 minutes. Wasn't that already supersonic? He didn't know that there was such an advanced thing in this world. There were more and more unknowns in this world. Now he could finally relax a little. The surrounding wolves still had no intention of attacking, and were surrounding him from afar. The rest was up to Ning Kaichen. At the thought of this, Rinpochen stuffed the last grenade back into his bag. After a while, Rinpochen heard a loud noise coming from the horizon. It sounded like a fighter jet flying in the sky. A look of joy appeared on Ning Kaichen's face. Sword, come. Rinpochen was moved. Such a big commotion? One had to know that this was a sword, not a plane. Planes were loud because they had engines. How did you make such a loud noise? At the same time, many aboriginals looked up at the sky. Quan Yonglin and Quan Yonghe sat on an open space in the forest. Not far from them was a pile of badly mutilated flesh and blood. From the broken fangs at the side of the pile of flesh and blood, one could tell the identity of this pile of flesh and blood. It was the wild boar that chased Ning Kaichen to the ends of the earth. Are you stupid? How many times have I told you? Now that you've smashed that black fatty into this state, how are you going to report back? The tail or the two fangs? You're going to be laughed at when you get back. It's all your fault. Quan Yonghe used his finger to poke Quan Yonglin's head and gnashed his teeth. Quan Yonglin lowered his head and accepted the lesson. A few more wounds appeared on his body. The deepest wound was on his waist, and it almost cut his abdomen open. At this moment, a loud explosion sounded in the sky. Both of them frowned and looked up. What was that? In the depths of the forest, Hong Xian was sitting on a rock with her eyes closed. She held a long saber in her hand and was surrounded by babeast corpses. None of them were intact. However, these babeasts were much bigger than the ones that Rinpoche had seen before. After hearing the sound, Hong Xian opened her eyes and looked up. Her eyes were filled with doubt at first. Then she recalled something that she had heard before and suddenly asked, "Is this a sword slave?" There were many people like them. Du Changkong was skinning a huge snake that was as thick as his waist. As he was skinning it, he hummed a tune from the mountains. When he heard the explosion in the sky, he looked around in bewilderment. Soon after, he found the source of the sound. At the foot of the mountain, many soldiers also looked up. One by one, the princes from the other three nations came out of their carriages. The empress was originally eating grapes in the carriage. She had just plucked a grape and had yet to put it into her mouth when she heard the explosion. She immediately frowned. Noisy. Give me the bow. She received a simple and crude longbow and a leather quiver from Hong Luan. She stood up and walked out of the carriage. She raised her head and looked in the direction of the explosion. It was as if she could see through the night sky and see the long sword that was rumbling in the sky. She threw the quiver back and Hong Luan hurriedly caught it. The empress knocked an arrow and held a white bone arrow between her fingers. A majestic aura rose from her body. Everyone at the foot of the mountain felt this aura pressing down on their heads. Everyone subconsciously bowed in the direction of the empress. Only the princes from the other three nations and some guards tried to resist. Plop. A few people couldn't resist and knelt on the ground. Other than a few who were confident in themselves, the rest also bowed in the direction of the empress. At this moment, she wasn't just the empress of Dayo. She was the seventh most powerful expert in the world, Qi Zixiao. Bowing to the seventh most powerful expert in the world was a form of respect from the bottom of their hearts. The empress pulled the bow to its fullest. The body of the bow was taut like a crescent moon. Then she abruptly let go. When the bowstring rebounded, it produced a loud buzzing sound that reached everyone's ears. However, no one saw the arrow and it didn't make any sound. It disappeared in the empress's hands just like that. After a while, a loud sound wave was heard. That arrow seemed to have shot through the air, and a series of explosions sounded in the sky. After shooting this arrow, the empress didn't even look at it and turned around to return to the carriage. At this moment, there was nothing fancy in the air. It was a long sword that was wrapped in a simple green leather. It was flying at high speed and vibrating as it flew. It resonated with the surrounding air and created a loud sound wave. At the same time, the body of the sword let out a joyful cry, as if it was happy that its master had summoned it. It was also like a young girl in love who was going to meet her lover. In the next second, a long arrow made of white bone appeared in front of it. With its huge inertia, it couldn't dodge in time. Clang. The two collided and a crisp and clear sound was heard. That long sword somersaulted countless times in the air before falling to the ground. Only when it was about to land on the ground did it stagger and stabilize its body. It let out a sorrowful cry as it flew shakily toward the mountains. Compared to the momentum it had when it first arrived, one was a young mistress returning home after marrying a tycoon, while the other was a little wife in a commoner's district who was bullied. Rinpoche was waiting for Ning Xiaochen's sword to descend from the sky with a brilliant sword aura. He was already considering whether he should hug this thick thigh in time. In his opinion, Ning Xiaochen was the main character. However, at this moment, a series of explosions sounded in the sky, following which the sound wave of the long sword disappeared. There was no trace of the long sword that he had expected to fly over with a brilliant sword aura. What's wrong now? Rinpoche asked subconsciously. Ning Xiaochen was also perplexed. Strange, why isn't it here yet? Scammer. Rinpoche couldn't help but curse. Ning Kaichen raised his head with a blank look on his face. What exactly was going on? Fortunately, the surrounding wolves didn't have any intention of attacking. After waiting for a few minutes, a long sword finally swayed in the sky and descended as if it was drunk. It actually flew over. But why do I feel that something is amiss? Even if there wasn't a brilliant sword aura, it should at least be a ray of cold light that flew over from the sky, right? Why does it look like it's drunk? This thought emerged in Rinpoche's mind. Ning Kaichen raised his hand, and the long sword swayed as it flew into his hand. When Ning Kaichen saw the few cracks on the body of the sword, his face was filled with heartache. When the long sword landed in his hand, it let out a low cry as if it was complaining about its tragic experience. Ning Kaichen immediately burst into tears. Seeing his sad look, Rinpoche couldn't help but ask, "What happened?" Chapter 111. Rinpoche looked at the shabbily dressed Ning Kaichen, who was crying while holding onto the sword. His heart was filled with, what the f***ck, is this even possible? Tonight's drama came one after another. From the sound of the sword, to Ning Kaichen being blasted unconscious, to the arrival of the flying sword, the plot was simply full of twists and turns. Although he didn't know where this sword was originally located in Great Xia, Lan City wasn't close to the border. For it to fly here in 10 minutes, it should be at least at the speed of sound, right? Such a small sword that was flying at the speed of sound was actually shot down by an arrow. It gave Rinpoche the feeling that a fighter jet was shot down by an arrow. It was enough to make the entire earth tremble. Putting aside the fact that this sword could fly by itself and be accurately guided, the fact that it was shot down by an arrow was more shocking to Rinpoche than the flying sword itself. However, such a thing really happened in front of him. Rinpoche looked at the sword in Ning Kaichen's hand. There was a small dot in the middle of the sword, and there were cracks extending outwards from that dot. It gave people the feeling that this sword would shatter with a light knock. Previously, when this sword came down, there was a rumbling sound in the air. However, after a series of explosions, the rumbling sound disappeared. At this time, the only person who could do such a thing and shoot it down with an arrow was probably the Empress. He didn't know whether the Empress knew how to shoot arrows, but in terms of strength, since she was the 7th most powerful expert in the world, she definitely had the ability to shoot arrows. Thinking of this, Rinpoche was almost certain that the sword was shot down by the Empress. For example, he had seen Quan Yonglin and Quan Yonghe in action before. Even though they could shock him, it was like comparing heaven and earth to this. Even if other people were stronger than them, they wouldn't be that much stronger. It was also impossible for the Imperial Guards to have such strength. It could only be the Empress, and she was probably in a bad mood. Just like those unlucky people who went to challenge the Empress last year. Thinking of this, Rinpoche looked at Ning Kaichen with some pity. He had to admit that he was really miserable. Even though Rinpoche didn't understand anything, it wasn't hard to imagine how precious this sword was. When he encountered a life-threatening situation, he summoned the sword over and actually met the Empress, who was in a bad mood. In the end, he ended up like this. Rinpoche now had the leisure to daydream. Just now, when the sword flew over, those wolves seemed to have sensed something and retreated into the darkness, leaving behind 2 corpses and 2 severely injured wolves. Ning Kaichen cried for a long time before Rinpoche patted him on the shoulder and lamented, "My condolences." Ning Kaichen cried even more miserably when he heard this. Rinpoche felt that it was better to let him cry on his own for a while. It's not a sin for a man to cry. Since Rinpoche had nothing to do, he filled the magazine of his pistol with bullets and sat there in a daze. After a long time, Ning Kaichen finally calmed down. He stroked the blade of the sword with a lifeless look on his face. Rinpoche then asked curiously, "Can this sword be restored? I need a large amount of materials to recover." Ning Kaichen's face was gloomy. "That's good." Rinpoche comforted her. "It's good that you can recover." Ning Kaichen continued to feel depressed. "You are a sword immortal?" Rinpoche asked again. At the very least, the ability to summon a sword from Great Xia with a shout was awesome. "I'm just a sword slave." Ning Kaichen shook his head bitterly. "Why do you say so?" Rinpoche asked curiously. He was still very interested. "You haven't heard of it?" Ning Kaichen turned to look at him. Seeing him nod his head, he lowered his head and stroked the sword again. "There's a sword mountain in this world. There are 3,000 spirit swords on it, and green bead is one of them. Every once in a while, a spirit sword will sense the birth of a person who meets the requirements and will automatically fly out from the sword mountain to the person who meets the requirements. Others call these people chosen by spirit sword masters and are extremely envious of them. In fact, we are just sword slaves. Ren Baqin and Ning Kaichen exchanged questions and answers. Ning Kaichen didn't hide anything about sword masters and let Ren Baqin understand what was going on. Only then did he know that it wasn't easy to be a sword master. Being chosen by a spirit sword was a good thing in a certain sense. One didn't need to practice and could become a famous expert with a spirit sword in hand. Furthermore, depending on the spirit sword in hand, one's strength would also be different. Among them, the weakest was an earthwheel expert and was even stronger than an ordinary earthwheel expert. This was an achievement that most practitioners could only dream of in their lifetime. However, in this world there were gains and losses. This saying couldn't be more true when it came to sword masters. First of all, they couldn't practice. It was unknown whether they were chosen by spirit swords because they had a special constitution that prevented them from practicing. There had never been a sword master who could practice. At most, they could only practice some simple martial arts. Other than that, they were no different from ordinary people. For example, Ning Kaichen was like this. If he had a spirit sword in hand, he would be an expert above the earthwheel level. Even most earthwheel experts wouldn't be his match. If he didn't have a spirit sword in hand, he was no different from an ordinary person, which was why he was in such a sorry state. Secondly, if a sword master always carried a sword with him, he rarely lived a long life. This was because the spirit sword would absorb the sword master's essence. It wasn't a big deal in a short period of time, but it would damage his lifespan over a long period of time. The earliest sword masters rarely lived more than 40 years old. Therefore, even though others called them sword masters, they generally thought of themselves as sword slaves. As the name suggested, they were like slaves of spirit swords. Even though spirit swords could make them stronger, they had to pay a huge price. Later on, an extremely talented person developed a type of sword nurturing pool. He built a pool according to a specific method and threw all kinds of precious materials into it to nurture the sword. In this way, apart from reducing the sword master's essence and lifespan, he could also use some special materials to enhance the power of the spirit sword, which was equivalent to increasing the sword master's strength. These materials included minerals, plants, and even the blood of some specific animals. A special liquid was also required. However, the characteristics and preferences of every spirit sword were different. Other than the special liquid used to nurture the sword, the other materials were not the same. Most of the time, the sword master had to personally go to the wilderness to try his luck and find materials that matched the spirit sword. Because the two materials were actually companions, the sword master would immediately know when he found a suitable material. Ning Kaichen's spirit sword was nurtured in the sword nurturing pool. If he encountered any danger, he could just summon the spirit sword. If he was near the sword nurturing pool, the spirit sword could reach him in an instant. He came to Dayo to look for opportunities and exchange some things. He didn't expect to be so unlucky. Green Bead was shot down by an arrow just as it was about to reach him. Furthermore, it was so badly damaged that he didn't know how long it would take for it to recover. Could be said that he lost everything. No wonder Ning Kaichen looked like he had nothing to live for. Ignoring the downcast Ning Kaichen, Renbachin felt that this world was getting more and more exciting. There were too many unknowns in this world and too many places that made Renbachin feel mysterious. The veil on the surface of this world was already so exciting. Renbachin didn't know what else was underneath. Chapter 112. Where is the Sword Mountain? Renbachin asked. No one knows. Every sword slave knows that there is such a sword mountain. Countless people want to explore it, but no one has ever found it, Ning Kaichen replied. Renbachin thought about it and felt that this world needed a satellite. It was a pity that he didn't have money. He felt that he would eventually have money. However, he couldn't bring such a big thing over. At the very least, he didn't bring his bed over. He didn't know if it was because of the mattress and bed sheets, but he always brought the bed sheets over and back. However, it was useless even if he brought them over. There was no launching device, no operating platform, and no debugging staff. How was he going to launch the satellite into the sky? Do spirit swords always choose newborn children? Most of the time. Some people get it later, but it's rare. Are spirit swords alive? Renbachin had always been curious about this. They are also alive, but they are different from us. The sword slaves could empathize with the pain and suffering they had suffered. If they are destroyed, the sword slaves will die too. Ning Kaichen stroked the sword. The green bead trembled slightly as if it was communicating with him. They can feel the pain when they are hurt? Of course they will convey their inner feelings to the sword slaves. For example, I feel pain all over my body now. Ning Kaichen continued to look aggrieved. Rinpoche felt that half of his expression was due to the pain. How many sword masters are there? I'm not sure. Usually, there are only about 100 of them. Only when the world is in chaos will more sword masters be born. According to records, thousands of years ago, there were thousands of sword masters in the world at the same time. That was a magnificent era. Countless heroes moved unhindered in the world. Just thinking about it makes one fascinated. Speaking of that magnificent era, Ning Kaichen's eyes lit up. He had always yearned for that era. However, when he thought of the green bead being shot down halfway, he immediately lost all his thoughts. His eyes dimmed, and his whole body emitted a miserable feeling. Rinpoche was filled with fantasies and expectations for this world while Ning Kaichen was dejected. The aboriginals on the mountain continued to do what they were supposed to do. Some people thought of something from the voice just now, but most of them didn't understand. Nowadays the sword master rarely appeared. Most of them were in Great Xia, so the aboriginals didn't know much about him. Everyone at the foot of the mountain also went back to rest. Many of them had guessed what the sound was, but they didn't know what happened after Qi Zixiao shot that arrow. His guess was that someone was unlucky. The empress was reclining in the carriage with a thick layer of animal skin under her. Qing Yuan and Hong Luan were massaging her legs and shoulders respectively. The empress was drinking wine by herself. "Your Majesty, what was that sound just now?" Hong Luan asked softly. As the empress's maid, she was experienced and knowledgeable, but she was still very curious about the situation just now. Hearing Hong Luan's question, Qing Yuan also pricked up her ears. "It's just a small bug. It's too noisy and disturbed me," the empress said casually. Seeing that the empress wasn't going to say much, the two of them didn't probe further. If Ning Kaichen and Green Bead heard what the empress said, they would probably be heartbroken. If Green Bead was a little more low-key and didn't nag so much, she probably wouldn't be in such a miserable state now. Whether it was as a person or as a sword, sometimes it was better to keep a low profile. Nothing else happened that night. After going through all kinds of things for the day, Rinpoche was already extremely tired. In the middle of the night, he added some branches to the bonfire, leaving Ning Kaichen, whose entire body was in pain, to lie on the ground and fall asleep. His body was covered with pebbles. After lying on the ground for a long time, his entire body was in pain. Even so, he didn't care anymore. It was obvious that the events of the day had caused him to be exhausted. His body was tired and so was his heart. Rinpoche was awoken by the cold. The sky was already bright, and a layer of white fog had risen in the surroundings. He sat up from the ground and realized that the water vapor in the forest had wet his clothes. The bonfire had also been extinguished. No wonder it was so cold. Ning Kaichen was hugging his sword. His eyes were already closed, but his eyebrows were still tightly knitted. Rinpoche got up and tried to search the bonfire. There wasn't a single spark and he couldn't be bothered to torment himself. He just hugged his arms and waited for daybreak. Thinking that he would be able to leave the mountain in a while, Rinpoche felt elated. The most dangerous night was finally over. After an hour, Ning Kaichen woke up as well. After waking up this time, she was more or less normal. At least she didn't look like a resentful woman anymore. Wait a while more. Start a fire and cook something to eat. After that, we will leave the mountain before noon, Rinpoche said. Ning Kaichen nodded his head and continued to hug his sword. When the sun rose from afar, the fog in the mountain had lessened. Rinpoche then went to the surrounding area to pick up some tree branches. He started a fire and roasted the meat. When the meat was done, it was already 7 or 8 o'clock. Both of them ate a simple meal and got up to leave the mountain. Rinpoche was still holding a crossbow in one hand and a tree branch in the other, alerting the enemy in the forest. On the other hand, Ning Kaichen was hugging his sword with both hands, looking like a sunset warrior as he followed behind him. Rinpoche walked along the stream. When he saw the stall of Lao Gan Ma from yesterday, Rinpoche's gaze swept across it. Immediately, he ran over and used a tree branch to search the stall. Soon after, he carefully took out something from the stall. When Ning Kaichen saw the thing in Rinpoche's hand, a disgusted look appeared on his face. Rinpoche didn't dislike it. If he didn't see wrongly, this should be that thing, right? The saber-toothed tiger's penis could also be considered as a tiger's penis, right? This good thing wasn't smashed. He was really lucky. He could take it back and give it to Qin Qing. That guy should need this treasure. At this moment, on the way down the mountain, Rinpoche didn't have the same look of bitterness and hatred as yesterday. Instead, he started to think about other things. After washing it in the stream, Rinpoche started to think about how to bring it back. He couldn't carry it in his hands. There were some other things in his waist bag. If he put this thing in, it would get dirty. Brother, help me carry it down the mountain. I can't carry it in my hands. Rinpoche put on a smile and asked Ning Kaichen. Ning Kaichen's face twitched. His head was like a rattle drum. Rinpoche saw that Ning Kaichen wouldn't touch it even if he killed him. He couldn't bear to throw it away either. Hence, he tore a strip of cloth from his body and rolled it up before stuffing it into his waist bag. Originally, his clothes were torn in many places in the forest. Furthermore, he tore it twice. At this moment, he looked like a beggar. He and the ragged Ning Kaichen were like a pair of brothers in hardship. The path down the mountain was much easier than going up the mountain. After walking for a while, they started to see figures. Du Changkong was carrying a mace on his back. He was holding a ball in both his hands and sprinting away. His speed was quite fast. Before Rinpoche could say anything, Du Changkong had already run far away. Not long after, Rinpoche saw someone carrying a toothed tiger that had already died. It was one size bigger than the one from yesterday. However, its head was smashed like a sakama. When Rinpoche saw the many mounts and carriages at the edge of the forest, tears started to well up in his eyes. He finally got out of this godforsaken forest alive. At the foot of the mountain, he saw that the nearby open space was filled with all kinds of prey. There was even someone recording at the side. The two of them came out empty-handed. When the others saw them, they didn't care. Quan Yonghe and Quan Yonglin came out from behind them. Quan Yonghe's face was filled with unhappiness while Quan Yonglin was laughing dryly. The two of them were also empty-handed. Quan Yonglin had a few more wounds on his body. Especially his waist, it was dyed red with blood. Rinpoche turned around and looked at the two of them. Needless to say, even if they encountered prey, they would have been smashed into smithereens by Quan Yonglin. Without caring about anything else, Rinpoche ran to report to the Empress in his dirty clothes. This time, it was a form of punishment for him to spend the night on the mountain. Only by making himself look more miserable would people sympathize with him. Your Majesty, I almost couldn't make it back this time. Upon seeing the Empress, Rinpoche immediately started to lament. Chapter 113. Why do I remember that Deputy Ren went on a killing spree? The Empress's cold voice was heard. Rinpoche froze. What did the Empress mean? Did she know that he killed Lien Baoqing? Otherwise, why would she say such a thing? Rinpoche's mind was filled with thoughts. At this moment, he didn't know how to reply. The Empress's following words made him feel as if he had been granted amnesty. Forget it, I won't hold you responsible for this matter. Go and tidy up. You have embarrassed yourself by looking like this, the Empress continued. Thank you, Your Majesty. Rinpoche quickly retreated and didn't dare to mention anything else. After he left, Rinpoche was almost certain that the Empress already knew about it. Otherwise, she wouldn't have said those last words. In that case, he could be considered worry-free and others wouldn't dig it out in the future. Naturally, he didn't know that the Empress already knew what he had done. After he left, the Empress thought of how Rinpoche came in with a miserable appearance and complained tearfully. Then he was frightened by her words. She found it amusing and laughed. What a crafty fellow. I have to knock him down a peg. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan looked at each other with smiles on their faces. When other people saw the Empress, they would tidy up cleanly. Who would come crying miserably like Deputy Ren? However, it was a good thing that Her Majesty wasn't in a bad mood every time she saw Deputy Ren. Following which, the Empress called Xenger over and said, if anyone asks about Lien Baoqing, just say that he overestimated himself and provoked a ferocious beast, causing his corpse to be swallowed. It was just an aristocratic family from Great Xia. They could even kill the envoy from the Yun nation, so why would they care about an aristocratic family from Great Xia? She was even a little interested in the tool that Wu Fang mentioned that Rinpoche used at that time. With her strength, she naturally wouldn't care about this kind of thing. Furthermore, from Wu Fang's description, she knew that this kind of thing was difficult to mass-produce. In that case, it wouldn't be as useful as some swords and sabers. However, this storyteller Ren really had a lot of tricks up his sleeves. Everyone's mounts were watched by the stream. Rinpoche's mountain-gazing bird was pushed to the outermost and was far away. The main reason was that there were many ferocious beasts, and it would tremble whenever it got close. Ren Baqin went to the stream to wash himself. Then he went to the side and took down the sleeping bag from the mountain-gazing bird. His official robe was placed inside. After changing into his official robes, Ren Baqin looked much more refreshed. After changing his clothes, he lay on the grass for a short while before he was called to roast some meat for the empress. He also roasted a piece of meat for himself. At this time the people on the mountain gradually came down. At the same time the top 3 of the great hunt had been selected. The first one was called Tao Meng, and the prey he brought back was a creature with horns on its head that looked like a leopard. It was called the guardian beast, and it was said that it specialized in guarding strange flowers and plants. It was as fast as lightning and its strength was not small either. For example, saber-toothed tigers and the like were its food. Many people asked Tao Meng what good items he had found. After all, if he had hunted down a guardian he would definitely have taken whatever it was guarding. The second one was Shiwanya, who brought back a monkey with golden fur all over its body. It was about 2/3 the size of a human and it was still alive. It was tied up tightly. From the tone of the others, this monkey was also very powerful and could understand human nature. If he was nurtured well he would be a good helper in the future. The third was Hong Wu's granddaughter Hong Xian. Ren Baqin roasted the meat while watching the bustle. After the rankings were finalized and presented to the empress, everyone started to prepare lunch and pack up their things at the same time. After lunch everyone started to return. Along the way someone mentioned that Lien Baoqing of the Lien family was missing. Previously, some people thought that he was thinking about the reward given by the empress, so he brought an earthwheel-level bodyguard to the mountains to hunt. After all, he had always been arrogant, so it was not strange for him to do such a thing. However, he had not appeared yet and everyone felt that something was amiss. He overestimated himself and challenged the beast. Even his bodyguard was swallowed by it, Xenger announced to everyone. After hearing this, even if some people felt that something was amiss, they didn't say anything more. After all, he wasn't related to Lien Baoqing. Dayo had already given this explanation. Regardless of what was going on behind his back, it was the Lien family's business. They didn't know if the Lien family, which had always been domineering, would swallow this loss. Even if they didn't want to eat it, there was nothing they could do. Did they really dare to ask Qi Zixiao to give them an explanation? After hearing this, Ren Baqin was once again sure that the empress already knew about what happened in the forest. Otherwise Xenger wouldn't have said this. It was obvious that the empress had suppressed the matter. After all, Xenger had come forward to explain that in the future, they would look for the empress if they had any problems. This outcome made him heave a sigh of relief. In the future no one would dig up this matter. Otherwise, it would be a slap to the empress's face. Otherwise, if the Lien family knew the truth, even though he wouldn't dare to do anything in Dayo, they would just have to send a few assassins to deal with him, and he would be in big trouble. At this moment Ren Baqin was rather grateful. There weren't many leaders who could take the blame for their subordinates. This thigh was indeed the right one to hug. In the afternoon, everyone returned to Lan City. There wasn't anyone to welcome them, but when the empress's carriage entered the city, there were still many aboriginal commoners cheering at the side. When everyone arrived at the plaza in front of the palace, the empress's carriage directly entered the palace. Only then did everyone disperse in 2s and 3s. Ren Baqin didn't care about anything else and directly returned to the Beast Park. When he saw Tian Tian and Gun Gun, he hugged them and rubbed his face against them. It was great to be back. After a while, Ren Baqin put the things back into the house with a claw mark on his face. However, before he could even sit down he was called into the palace. "Do you remember that you said you prepared 2 menus?" the empress asked. "Yes," Ren Baqin lowered his head and replied. Even though he was very grateful to the empress in the afternoon, he still felt a little guilty now. "Let's just choose the unusual menu. These people are too daring. They dare to do anything," the empress said coldly. "Yes, your majesty." Ren Baqin complied and immediately retreated. He only heaved a sigh of relief when he was outside. He pondered in his heart, those people shouldn't have committed any crimes recently, right? Even though there were some small scuffles, they shouldn't have committed any major crimes. Why did the empress find them an eyesore? Ren Baqin pondered for a long time. Could it be that Lien Baoqing tried to assassinate him? After thinking about it, it was highly possible. Hearing the empress say that she didn't blame him, the empress should be very clear about the situation at that time. To assassinate a Dayo official right under the eyes of the empress, this wasn't just bold, it was practically soaring to the heavens. Now that Lien Baoqing was dead, the empress directly vented her anger on others. Ren Baqin felt that this was the most likely reason. Or it could be that he didn't know what happened on the day he returned to Earth to buy a gun. However, there were still the big shots in the imperial court. The Empress didn't say that she was going to cook 2 types of banquet dishes. In that case, the big shots in the imperial court would also cook the same dishes. He must never let them know that he was the one who designed the menu. Otherwise, it would be hard to guarantee that he wouldn't make things difficult for himself. Ren Baqin pondered as he arrived at the entrance of the imperial kitchen. He simply didn't want to think about it anymore. In any case, whatever the Empress said would be the same. When everyone in the imperial kitchen saw Ren Baqin, they greeted one after another, "Brother Ren. The menu has been decided. It's the second set of dishes. That interesting dish will be used tomorrow." "Are the ingredients ready?" Ren Baqin asked. When the others heard this, they revealed a look of anticipation. "I can get someone to send it over any time," Caretaker Go said in a deep voice. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. Chapter 114. After Ren Baqin left the palace, another person entered the palace. He was about 40 to 50 years old and looked very ordinary. He was the kind of person that would be hard to spot in a crowd. He was wearing ordinary clothes made of coarse cloth. His height was average among the aboriginals, about 1.7 meters. However, he stood there like a towering mountain, giving off an unshakable vibe. "Your Majesty." The burly man cupped his fists and shouted loudly. "Someone give the general-in-chief who supports the nation a seat of honor." The Empress had a rare gentle smile on her face. All these years, she only behaved like this when she saw the general-in-chief who supports the nation, Hong Wu. The Empress was only 16 years old when she ascended to the throne. It was very difficult for a 16-year-old girl to sit in this position. Countless people in Dayo, Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Qin nation stared at her. At that time, her strength was far from being able to look down on the world. It was all thanks to the general-in-chief who supports the nation, Hong Wu, that she was able to secure her position. The general-in-chief who supports the nation was conferred by the late emperor. From this, one could see the late emperor's expectations of Hong Wu. Hong Wu did not disappoint the late emperor. Therefore, to the Empress, Hong Wu was like an uncle and the only person she could rely on. 7 years had passed and this relationship had been preserved until now. Every year, when the Empress celebrated her birthday, Hong Wu would come to the palace for a chat after returning from the north. To the Empress, this was a rare moment of warmth. "Your Majesty is getting more and more powerful, and I am also getting older." Hong Wu smiled after sitting down. He looked at the Empress with a gentle gaze that even Hong Xian rarely saw. The general-in-chief is no different from 10 years ago. The Empress smiled as she sat on the couch. "Qing Yuan, fill up the general-in-chief's cup." Hong Wu said, "Even though my face hasn't changed, time is unforgiving. I am indeed old." Then he took the cup and drank it in one gulp while laughing heartily. "Thank you for the wine, Your Majesty." "Fill it up again. This cup is for the general-in-chief. Great Xia only dared not act rashly because you were stationed in the north. Great Xia has worked hard and made great contributions." The Empress finished speaking and drank the wine in one gulp. After the toast, the two of them began to talk about other things. "I feel that Great Xia will not be content with their lot in the future. The emperor of the Great Xia dynasty is very ambitious. After ascending to the throne, he has been working hard for many years. Now that the strength of the Great Xia dynasty is far greater than before, I'm afraid he has some ideas," Hong Wu said. Then he said with some regret, "Back then, before he succeeded the throne, I wanted to kill him at the border. Unfortunately, he escaped." The Empress nodded her head slightly and said, "I'm afraid that they are making preparations. I'm afraid we'll have to trouble Great General next." If Ren Baqin heard their conversation, he would know why Great Xia sent that white bear over. Although Great Xia has a large number of elite soldiers, the aboriginal warriors aren't afraid of them. "If they come, I'll show them what I've got," Hong Wu said heroically. "I will send an order to the mountains to recruit 20,000 soldiers." The Empress nodded. One had to know that even the ordinary aboriginal warriors weren't weak. After undergoing training, their strength far surpassed that of the elite soldiers of Great Xia. In terms of individual strength, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he could fight against 20 people alone. Furthermore, this was under the circumstances that Dayo lacked armor and weapons. However, a duel in the army wasn't a simple matter. Currently, Dayo had a total of 90,000 soldiers. Among them, 15,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the South guarded the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation. 20,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the Northeast guarded the border with the Yun Nation. 15,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the Southeast guarded the border with the Qin nation. 30,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the North guarded the border with Great Xia in the north. The remaining 20,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the South guarded the whole of Dayo. However, these 100,000 elite soldiers were the foundation of Dayo over the years. It could be said that all the taxes collected by Dayo in the south were used to support these 100,000 elite soldiers. The most elite soldiers were the 30,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the North. However, the equipment of these 30,000 elite soldiers was far inferior to that of Great Xia's. They completely relied on their valiant individual strength to firmly suppress the 200,000 soldiers on the opposite side. However, if Great Xia really wanted to attack Dayo, they could deploy at least 500,000 soldiers. 30,000 soldiers against 500,000 soldiers. Their equipment were inferior to that of the other party. Furthermore, under the circumstances that they were defending, even Hong Wu couldn't do anything. After all, the other party could choose to break through in any direction, but it was impossible for Hong Wu to defend only one place. Now that the Empress had recruited another 20,000 soldiers, Hong Wu could have more cards in his hands. At least, he could maintain a considerable number of soldiers at each pass. This was already the best she could do. It was difficult to equip the weapons of these 20,000 soldiers in a short period of time. Great Xia's storehouse could be said to be poor. However, she immediately thought of Rinpochen. This fellow had a lot of tricks up his sleeves and knew a lot of things. She wondered if he could be of some use in this aspect. In fact, Rinpochen had mentioned smelting a few times before. However, he was usually referring to forging. The Empress didn't understand what he meant and didn't take it to heart. If Rinpochen had said from the start that he could smelt more iron and forge more weapons, he wouldn't have been nearly killed. Now, the Empress thought that it would be best if Rinpochen could be of some help in this aspect. Even if he couldn't, he could get some other things out and use the channels to exchange for some weapons from the Yun nation and the Qin nation. At present, he should still be able to get some from the Yun nation and the Qin nation. If Great Xia really made a move, she was afraid that it would be really difficult to get more from the outside world. Not only weapons but salt, rations and the like were also the same. Fortunately, Great Xia should still be in the preparatory stage and there was still some time. Your Majesty, you have to pay attention to the Yun nation and the Qin nation, Hong Wu said again. The Empress nodded. She understood that Dayo was different from the other three nations because the aboriginals were different from them. Naturally, the nations that they established were different as well. It was just like a wolf sneaking into a flock of sheep. The Yun nation and the Qin nation had been feeling uneasy about Dayo for a long time. Dayo even almost attacked the capital of the Yun nation. If Great Xia wanted to send troops, it was impossible that they didn't send people to contact them first. If the Yun nation and the Qin nation attacked together, it would indeed be somewhat dangerous. After talking about national affairs, Hong Wu and the Empress talked about other things. Most of them talked about the past and reminisced about the past. Both of them chatted rather happily and laughed out loud from time to time. Just as the Empress was in high spirits, Hong Wu looked at her and sighed. "Great General, what's the matter?" the Empress asked. Hong Wu had always been like a tall mountain that everyone looked up to. She had never seen him sigh like this before. Your Majesty ascended the throne at the age of 16. It has been 7 years since then, and you have grown from a frail young lady to an empress that is praised by the people of the world. I am very gratified to see that your Majesty has grown over the years. However, your Majesty is now 23 years old, and you have to have a descendant. When Hong Wu said this, he immediately turned into an old man who was worried about his wife. He even brought up his seniority. The Empress's face immediately turned ugly. The year before last, Hong Wu used all kinds of methods to celebrate her birthday. This year he changed to playing the emotional card. She shouldn't have asked him that question and let him perform his own one-man show. Your Majesty, I don't have many years left. Chapter 115. I started writing in May last year and this is my second book. How should I put it? People who write books have a story in their hearts that they want to describe and tell people. Every book is a magnificent world, and it's all about love and hate. It's the same for this book. To be honest, the opening of this book wasn't smooth. The editor told me bluntly that this type of book is more difficult to produce results. There have been books with this style in the past, but they didn't have good results. However, I have such a story in my heart, such a character, and I want to tell her. Therefore, in the end, I insisted on my own ideas and wrote this book. After publishing the book, the results weren't too good at first. I was quite nervous, afraid that it would fail. After all, telling the story I wanted to tell was out of feelings, but feelings can't be eaten. I still have to support my family. Up until now, this book has done a lot better than I expected at the beginning, which made me relieved. I can continue to tell this story that I like. First of all, I would like to thank all my friends for their support. Without your support, I definitely wouldn't have been able to persevere. I have mentioned the reason before. Secondly, I would like to thank the editor Wudong. Although he wasn't very optimistic about this theme, he didn't reduce the support he gave me and gave me enough recommendation spots. Now, I have close to 38,000 subscribers. It's time to check the results when it goes on sale tomorrow. I'm taking more than 30,000 subscribers. You won't embarrass me too much, right? If the subscription ratio is too low, I really won't have the face to see others. I hope that all my friends can support me if possible. Only by supporting the original can there be people immersed in fantasy telling stories that they like instead of following the trend for money. Speaking of the issue of updating, this book is taking much longer than I expected. Maybe I care too much about it, so I keep writing and deleting, causing the speed to be unable to speed up. I only have the next day's draft in my hands every day. I'll give it my all when it goes on sale tomorrow. I'll guarantee 5 chapters at least. If the initial subscriptions exceed my expectations and reach 3,000 subscribers, I'll add 2 more chapters. The Alliance leader will add 4 chapters, the sect leader will add 2 chapters, and the 3 branch leaders will add 1 chapter. That's about it. If I can't add them tomorrow, I'll continue adding them the day after, and the day after that until I make up for the number. Chapter 116. The next day, Rinpoche strolled to the Honglu Bureau early in the morning. The Empress's birthday celebration was today. After that, his mission would be considered complete. He really did not have much interest in the position of Honglu deputy. When he returned to Earth at night, he would bring back some good stuff. At that time, he would look for Du Changkong to exchange for martial arts. Who knows, he might be able to become an expert or something. He was looking forward to the cultivation techniques of this world. Now, he could only hope that he could learn the cultivation techniques of this world. After all, people from 2 different worlds might have some differences in their bodies. That would be terrible. Qi Heng and Qi Sheng, who were guarding the door, were still respectful towards Rinpoche. Even though it wasn't a secret that Rinpoche was only hanging here temporarily, Rinpoche had indeed done a good job in the Honglu Bureau. These days there weren't many troubles at the Honglu Bureau. As a result, the people at the Honglu Bureau were rather respectful towards Rinpoche. Rinpoche was rather pleased with the attitude of the people in the Honglu Bureau. However, the Aboriginals were well aware of their own situation. In reality, the Aboriginals were overbearing but not ruthless enough. Even though it was a deterrent to the people from other nations, they wouldn't be too heavy-handed since they were here to celebrate the Empress's birthday. In addition, Qiji's own strength was very high, so he could easily deal with the other party. He just had to beat them until they were convinced. That was why he had broken the legs of 4 people last year, but he was still playing tricks on them. However, Rinpoche was different. He did not have the strength to truss a chicken and did not have any foundation in Dayo. If he could not suppress them, he was afraid that he would have to revolve around them every day. He would not be able to get any benefits from the Empress either. The ruthless methods he used and the even more unscrupulous behavior he displayed afterwards were the real reason why they tucked their tails between their legs. It didn't mean that he was much better at handling things than the original Qiji. Rinpoche returned to his room. Not long after, someone came over and handed Rinpoche a token. This was the name list for tonight's banquet. The other people who were invited to attend the banquet had already received the token. Rinpoche was the only one who had gone missing for a day and then went to participate in the Great Hunt. This token was only given to him today. Rinpoche fiddled with the token. He had already prepared the gift for the Empress. The last time he came back he had also brought it back. There shouldn't be any problem. On Earth it was not expensive, but here, it should be high-end and of a higher grade. It was not inferior to the precious items given by others. Furthermore, there was an exceptional bootlicker attached to the gift. He reckoned that the Empress would like it. After sitting for a while, Rinpoche recalled that no one had told him what to wear. He got up and went to Gu Daxiong's room. He heard a deafening snoring at the door. It was really comfortable being a hands-off shopkeeper. This period of time was the most troublesome in the past years, but this year he had nothing to do with it. Sir Gu. Rinpoche knocked on the door and shouted. A moment later, a voice came from inside. What's the matter? Come in. When Rinpoche entered, Gu Daxiong was sitting on a chair with his arms crossed. Sir Gu, may I know what to wear to the banquet? Rinpoche cupped his fists and asked. Gu Daxiong scratched his head. Of course it's the gown. Soon after, he remembered that Rinpoche didn't know much about these things, so he said, "Go to Jingyang Road and look for a Guji clothing store. You can make formal attire there. You are now secondary class, rank 6, and the color is grass green." "Thank you, Sir Gu, but can you get someone to bring me there?" Rinpoche asked again. Fortunately, he had asked. Otherwise, he wouldn't have known that Dayo had gowns, let alone where to get one. He hoped that there would be ready-made clothes in the clothing store so that he wouldn't be held up. "Look for Gu Shou and get him to get someone to bring you there." Gu Daxiong waved his hand and yawned. A moment later, Rinpoche was led by someone to the entrance of a shop on Jingyang Road. "Deputy Rin, this is the place. Tell them your position and they will know," the person who led the way said to Rinpoche and left in a hurry. There weren't many people in the shop. Some ready-made clothes were hung on the rack. After all, the others were already prepared. No one was like Rinpoche, who participated in the exercise at night and came to make the formal attire in the afternoon. There were 2 Aboriginal ladies leaning on the counter. There was a burly man sitting beside them. When they saw Rinpoche enter in his official attire, the 2 ladies immediately perked up. "Sir, what do you want to buy?" "Formal attire for the banquet. Can you make it?" Rinpoche asked. "I just need to make some alterations. It will be ready in 4 hours. One of the ladies said, "Sir, please follow me." It was around 9 in the morning. 4 hours was equivalent to 1 in the afternoon. He could make it in time. After Rinpoche entered, there was a lady who was either from the Yun Nation, the Chin Nation, or Great Xia. She was standing at one side with a ruler in her hand. Rinpoche stretched out his arm and allowed her to measure his measurements. He was trying to guess which country this lady was from. After all, the people from those 3 countries were similar. Only the people from the Chin Nation were slightly darker. There was also a possibility that she was a remnant citizen of the Hao Nation. In fact, the Aboriginals didn't look much different from them. They were just a little more boorish. The difference in body size was huge. After explaining his position, Rinpoche left and returned to the Honglu Bureau. He stayed there until the afternoon before collecting his formal attire and returning to the Beast Park. Dayo's formal attire was very simple and didn't have many decorations. It was just a buttoned robe with the left side pressing down on the right side and extending all the way to the armpit. The buttoned and cuffs were all made of red cloth with floral patterns. Other than the buttoned front, waist and cuffs, this formal attire was entirely green. The lower part of the attire was a little lower than the knees and a pair of green pants were required. Other things didn't matter to Rinpoche, but the color of this formal attire gave him a headache. Even if it was dark green, it would be good. After wearing this formal attire, he immediately felt that he was as green as the prairie of Hohot. Rinpoche carried out a wooden box that was half the height of a person. The box was made of wood and was wrapped in craft paper. The surrounding area was wrapped with soft paper. This was the birthday gift for the Empress. After checking the items, Rinpoche went out and wandered around. He found Tai Dao and Teng Hulu. When they saw him, they praised him. "Sir Rin, you look really handsome in this formal attire. Stop flattering me. In a while, the 2 of you will change into clean clothes and help me move these things to the front gate of the palace," Rinpoche said. He was already so green, how could he still call himself handsome? "Yes, sir." The 2 immediately nodded their heads. Then they asked curiously, "Sir, I didn't see you preparing anything for Her Majesty. I thought you would go empty-handed." "Naturally, I have already prepared it." Rinpoche waved his hand. "The 2 of you go and change your clothes." When it was almost evening, Rinpoche brought Tai Dao and Teng Hulu to the front gate of the palace. There were already a few carriages parked at the side of the plaza. In front of the palace gate, there were already a few rows of imperial bodyguards forming a human wall. There were 2 paths in the human wall. The officials of Dayo and the officials from the other 3 nations were separated when they entered. The big shots of the imperial court who came later were mostly men with short hair or bald heads, and they all had strong bodies. The women, on the other hand, all looked very valiant. They were also dressed in formal attire, but it was more complicated than the men's. The female officials in Dayo weren't like those in ancient China, who were all in the palace. The proportion of female officials in the outer court of Dayo wasn't low. After all, the Empress was the strongest in Dayo, and the Aboriginal women weren't necessarily weaker than the men. However, Aboriginal women were mostly officials in the Ministry of Revenue and the Ministry of Appointments. They were in charge of taxation and official assessments. Very few of them joined the army. Lu Ruiao's mother was the imperial treasurer, in charge of money and grain. Not long after, Mr. Emptiness, Ning Kaichen and the others also arrived. Ning Kaichen did not know where his spirit sword was. In any case, he came alone. It was the same for Mr. Emptiness. He did not bring any of the four beauties with him. What made Rinpochen slightly surprised was that Ning Kaichen was actually sitting in the middle of the hall, slightly in front, while Mr. Emptiness was sitting in the middle and slightly behind. Both of them were only 7 or 8 seats apart. As time passed, the empty hall began to fill up, but the seats of honor on both sides were still empty. The people who came next were the real big shots, such as the second elder. There were 3 empty seats at the very front. Other than the second elder, there was still one more seat, but no one knew who it was. Next, the 7th Prince of Great Xia arrived. This time around, he was the guest of honor from the 3 nations. Naturally, he was seated in the seat of honor on the right side. After the 7th Prince came in, he immediately cast his gaze in Rinpochen's direction and nodded at the person who had the same face as him. It wasn't only him. When he came in, the rest of the people also looked at him and Rinpochen. After all, there were 2 people who looked exactly the same. One was the 7th Prince of Great Xia, and the other was a secondary class, rank 6 official of Dayo. This kind of situation made many people feel that it was interesting. The moment Rinpochen saw the 7th Prince, his heart surged with the same impulse he had previously. Furthermore, this feeling was even stronger than before. This made him squint his eyes slightly. After the 7th Prince brought his people to the seat of honor on the right side and sat down, Rinpochen lowered his head slightly. His gaze was on the table, and he clenched his fists tightly for a while before releasing them. When an elder who was much thinner and weaker than the rest of the aboriginals entered the palace, and his posture wasn't as straight as before, the noises in the palace quieted down a lot. Following which, everyone stood up and greeted him. Even those arrogant big shots in the army lowered their voices when they saw him. This person was the great elder Shi Qing. It was because of him that there were so many people in the Shi family stronghold who held office in the palace. For example, Shi Hu and Shi Wanshan. Shi Qing was dressed in a deep red ceremonial robe. If it wasn't for the scar on his face, he would look like an old man on the street. Similarly, the junior elder Zhe Kohai and Shi Qing entered almost one after the other. After the 2 of them arrived, the noises in the palace quieted down a lot, and the rest of the people were more or less quiet. The 2 of them sat on the 2nd and 3rd seats on the left side. Only the seat of honor was still empty, and many people's gazes drifted to that seat from time to time. Even Rinpochen could roughly guess who that seat belonged to. Sure enough, a few minutes later, an ordinary-looking middle-aged man who gave off the impression of a towering mountain entered the palace. Everyone quietened down. Even the 2nd elder didn't behave like this when he entered. Everyone stood up as a form of respect for the strong. Sir Hong Wu. Everyone greeted him. In particular, the voices of the big shots in the army were the loudest. On the right side, the people from the 3 nations also focused their attention on this man who could be said to be the most prestigious person in Dayo. Everyone was somewhat curious about Hong Wu. After Hong Wu sat down, the noises in the palace became much quieter. Everyone knew that the banquet was about to begin. At this moment, Rinpochen adjusted his mood and looked at the opposite side. There was a row of gigolos sitting in front of him. There were all kinds of them. There were the handsome boy type, the handsome man type, the playboy type, the melancholic and melancholy type. If this group of people were to be placed in the other nations, they might really attract the screams of many young girls who yearned for love and become a good couple. However, when he thought of the Empress's cold temperament and martial arts, Rinpochen felt that these people probably wouldn't stand a chance. After all, the Empress wasn't a 15 or 16-year-old girl who hadn't seen the world before. She couldn't be deceived with just her looks. It was useless even if one's eyes could electrify. Rinpochen looked at the peach blossom eyes opposite him and shuddered. Just as Rinpochen was sizing them up, grading and letting his imagination run wild, a group of maids served the dishes. This time the palace really quieted down. The kind of absolute silence. Everyone looked at the dishes in front of them and thought, "What the hell is this?" Even though he didn't know what was so important about Rinpochen that Qi Zixiao would directly flip the table, he still decided to take a gamble after a few days of consideration. Even if he was the 7th most powerful expert in the world, this gift was still very valuable, especially considering his status. He was betting that Qi Zixiao would give him the thing he wanted. That bottle of blood was too important to him. It could save him at least 10 years of hard work. Even if this private transaction became public and the news of him giving such an important thing to the Dayo Empress would spread back to Great Xia, he didn't care. Once the Empress heard about this gift, she understood the seventh prince's intention. Since the other party had already done so, she would give him the Kirin blood. The next gift was more interesting. It was actually a painting of 100 beauties. It would be fine if it was given to a man like a prince, but what was the meaning of giving it to the Empress? Most of the other gifts were jewels or paintings. Very few people were interested in them. There were only two that everyone was interested in. One was Rinpoche's, a supreme mirror worthy of your majesty. The other was Ning Caichen's 100 beauties. Many people felt that there was definitely something strange about this 100 beauties. The Empress seemed to understand everyone's thoughts and directly said, "Bring out the 100 beauties and Rinpoche's gifts. I think everyone would also like to see what they look like." The first to be brought out was the 100 beauties. Was a 1.2-meter wide painting scroll that was 10 meters long after it was unfolded. The figures on it were vivid and lifelike. Indeed, all of them were exceptionally talented. The people from the Yun Nation, Qin Nation, and Great Xia realized that the people on the painting were actually the most outstanding beauties in the world. Not only their looks but their martial arts, background and so on. The person who collected this 100 beauties was indeed a formidable person. At the very least, it would require resources to meet one of them. Furthermore, there was a person on the painting that everyone found somewhat familiar. Everyone's gaze fell on the seventh prince. One of the women was actually Xiao Wu, who was always by the seventh prince's side. Chapter 120. Great Xia's young master Ning, please talk about this painting. The Empress looked at it carefully and didn't see anything strange. The ladies in the painting were stunning. Could it be that Ning Caichen wanted to put them on par with her? What a joke. Ning Caichen stood up and cupped his hands at the Empress. Dayo's Empress, please forgive me for being impulsive. This painting was made by a strange person. His lifelong wish was to paint all the beauties in the world. However, he couldn't continue after painting 99 of them. What? Someone beside him asked. Because out of these 99 beauties, there was one person who received a score of 5. However, he couldn't paint that person no matter how hard he tried. Therefore, when he knew that I was coming to Dayo, he entrusted this painting to me and presented it to the Empress to fulfill his wish. After that, Your Majesty can burn this painting. There are number 100 beauties in this world. One person is enough. How can others be compared to her? Ning Caichen cupped his hands and said. Everyone was dumbfounded by his words. Even Rinpoche was cursing in his heart. How can you suck up to such an extent? How are you going to survive after returning to Great Xia? Ning Caichen was a talent and a formidable enemy. If he had known earlier, he would have left him behind to feed the wolves. Needless to say, the rest of the people couldn't even take out the poems that they had prepared to praise the Empress. They couldn't take it out at all. With Ning Caichen's performance, whatever the rest of them said would be useless. However, the seventh prince frowned. 100 Xiao Wus couldn't even compare to one Qi Zixiao? Qi Zixiao received a score of 5 out of 5 out of 5? How could he feel about this? It was as if he was the only one who treated a commoner like a treasure. His mood immediately turned sour. Previously, the Empress was a little unhappy, but now, her face relaxed and the corners of her mouth curled up. Everyone could see that the Empress was in a good mood. Great Xia's young master Ning, I will accept this painting. The Empress nodded. Ning Caichen cupped his hands and returned to his seat. Your Majesty naturally has a score of 5 out of 5 out of 5. A burly man touched his bald head and laughed. Not just 5 out of 5 but 6 out of 7 as well. I think that Mutant's vision is still too shallow. Another burly man immediately followed up. A group of burly men began to brag about the Empress. However, these words were only effective if the first person said it. The Empress said, bring out Rinpoche's gift. I think everyone is curious and I'm also extremely curious. After the Empress opened her mouth, everyone nodded their heads in succession. They were indeed curious about what exactly was the half-body supreme mirror that Her Majesty was talking about. The name was strange but the tone was also very big. Next, 2 people carried a box to the center of the hall. The outer packaging wasn't very exquisite. In fact, it was very rough. It was an outer box made of wood. Through the cracks, one could see what was inside but they couldn't tell what it was. Rinpoche, you can take out your gift for everyone to see, the Empress said. Rinpoche stood up and walked to the center of the hall. Fortunately, he was prepared. Even though Ning Caichen's bootlicking was excellent, Rinpochen was not inferior to Ning Caichen's and could be considered the best bootlicking ever. May I trouble any sirs to open this box? Don't damage the item inside. Rinpochen cupped his hands and said to the row of people on the left. Everyone looked at each other. If it was a more troublesome item they would be a little interested. However, they were too lazy to touch this wooden box. Let me do it. In the end, a burly man at the end of the row stood up and walked to the front of the hall. He first bowed to the Empress, then gently pinched the wooden box with his fingers and broke it. He pinched it from the top to the bottom, then pulled it apart with both hands. The entire wooden box fell to pieces. Rinpochen held onto the half-body mirror that was wrapped in craft paper and nodded to that burly man to express his gratitude. Thank you very much, sirs. Following which, he tore the craft paper and revealed a shiny silver mirror. The frame was made of European metal and was extremely complicated to make. Just the pattern and craftsmanship alone would require a lot of effort for a blacksmith to make it. What was even more attractive was the surface of the mirror. It was different from the somewhat blurry and dim copper mirrors that were currently used. This mirror reflected the outside world without any blur and everything was extremely clear. The inside of the mirror was truly like another hall. Everything down to the finest detail could be seen. After seeing this mirror, there wasn't a single woman in the hall who wasn't tempted. There were also 10 words on the left and right sides of this mirror. If heaven didn't give birth to Her Majesty, the ages would be like a long night. Someone read out the words one by one. Everyone was shocked. Rinpochen cupped his hands toward the Empress and said, There is only one such mirror in this world. I believe that only Her Majesty is qualified to possess it. Just like the words on the mirror, if heaven didn't give birth to Her Majesty, the ages would be like a long night. It had to be said that Rinpochen's bootlicking was too effective. Just now Ning Caichen's 100 beauties had already amazed everyone. At this moment when Rinpochen took out the mirror, everyone was shocked. The mirror was a rare treasure but the words on it were the most important. If heaven didn't give birth to Her Majesty, the ages would be like a long night. Before heaven let Her Majesty be born, the ages would be like a long night. These words were too imposing. Everyone could feel the imposing manner from these words. Previously, Ning Caichen said that Her Majesty took up 50% of all the women in the world. The other 99 exceptional beauties took up 40%, and the rest of the women only took up 1%. Only when all the women in the world were added up could they compete with Her Majesty. This was already an extremely exaggerated praise, and Ning Caichen would probably have some trouble in the future. However, this was still comparing Her Majesty to other women. When it came to Rinpochen, it went one step further. Since ancient times, this mirror included all the outstanding geniuses, all the heroes who dominated the world and all the emperors who ruled the world. Before Her Majesty appeared in this world, even with all of you, this world was still in the dark night. After Her Majesty was born, this world was truly glorious. Compared to Her Majesty, all of you are but the light of a firefly. Just now they could still respond to Ning Caichen's words, but now they didn't dare to respond to Rinpochen's words. These words were too arrogant. He truly regarded the heroes of the world as nothing and the countless heroes of the past thousands of years as nothing. Even in their own homes, no one dared to say these words, let alone on such an occasion. After recovering from the shock, the people from Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Qin nation glared at Rinpochen. Wasn't this flattery too much? Everyone felt that Rinpochen's bootlicking had gone too far this time. Qi Zixiao might not dare to respond to these words. Putting everything else aside in terms of strength, she was only the 7th most powerful expert in the world and not the number 1 expert in the world. If she were to respond to these words, what would the other 6 people think of her? What would the Emperor of Great Xia think of her? Did she really think that there was no one else in this world? For a moment, the hall quietened down again. No one spoke as they waited to see how this would end. Chapter 122. Her Majesty was the Empress. If she was looking for a son-in-law, the other party would have the title of a prince. That was why the Empress said, "You shall enter the palace and become the king." Your Majesty, please reconsider. Your Majesty, please reconsider. Your Majesty, please reconsider. The entire hall exploded in an instant and immediately turned into a wet market. Seeing the reactions of these people and thinking about what the Empress just said, Rinpochen had an incredible thought. It can't be? What's going on? Not only was Rinpochen's body stiff, but his entire body was like a block of wood. Enter the palace and become the king? If he guessed correctly, he was going to marry the empress? Otherwise, why would those people have such a big reaction? But how could this be possible? This was the seventh most powerful person in the world, the Empress of Dayo. Why would she suddenly make such a decision? Am I crazy or is she crazy? Now the entire hall was in a mess. Everyone stood up from their seats and begged the Empress to reconsider. On the right, the descendants of the aristocratic families from the three nations and the seventh prince were also dumbfounded. Qi Zixiao chose this secondary class, rank 6 official from nowhere as her husband? What? Everyone was thinking the same thing. Why? Some people even pinched their own thighs. Was this a dream? Everyone was at a loss. Mr. Emptiness coughed violently for a while and looked at Rinpochen with a smile on his face. He came here for other matters and had never thought of becoming the Empress's husband. Therefore, when he saw the scene in the hall, he felt that it was interesting. Ning Kaichen had a strange expression on his face. If he knew this would happen, he wouldn't have spent so much effort to curry favor with Qi Zixiao. He might as well curry favor with this new prince. Fortunately, he had gone through thick and thin with Qi Zixiao on the mountain, right? Even Green Bead was shot down by Qi Zixiao with an arrow. This could be considered as giving him some face. Thinking of Green Bead, he felt his heart ache again. The seventh prince sat there with lifeless eyes. It was as if he had received a huge shock. How did this guy who looked exactly like him get Qi Zixiao's favor? The Empress looked at the group of people below and inexplicably felt very happy. She stood up and said, "Let's end the banquet here. The rest of you can go back. As for what you want to say, follow me to the throne room." As soon as he finished speaking, he stood up and left the hall. Everyone in Dayo's imperial court hurriedly followed him. Hongwu walked past Rinpochen and placed his hand on Rinpochen's shoulder. He furrowed his eyebrows and left without saying a word. Rinpochen was left standing in the field, not knowing what to do. No one seemed to have asked for his opinion. Should he follow them or stay here? Congratulations, Imperial Prince Ren. A sleeping bag, a pistol, a grenade, a bedsheet from Earth, an e-book, a camera, a small bag of sweets and a short knife that someone gave him. Rinpochen watched as everyone packed up his things. Then he turned to caretaker Sher with a sullen face and said, "Help me take care of these two little fellows. Also, make sure they don't slack off on the 2 plots of land." At this moment he felt that he was like a commoner who was being robbed. P.S. Thank you to Long Outyin Love Food for Thought and the 7th Generation Madman for your tips. Chapter 123. The Empress sat in the throne room, looked around at the crowd and said, "If you have anything to say, say it now." "Your Majesty, although you want to have an heir, this person can't do it," a burly man standing in the throne room said. "Your Majesty, this person's origin is unknown and he's too weak. I also feel that he can't do it." "Your Majesty, please choose again. After all, this is related to having an heir." "Your Majesty, the Aboriginals have thousands of good men. Why don't you choose from among us?" "Your Majesty, this person is definitely not worthy of you." The Empress sat in the throne room, propped her chin with the back of her hand, and looked at the noisy crowd below. She was rather happy. After waiting for a while, she sat up straight and said coldly, "Why? Do I need your approval to choose someone?" As soon as she said this, the crowd immediately became much quieter. However, they still said, "Your Majesty, please reconsider. If I choose a son-in-law, so what if he's strong or weak? Which man in this world can compare to me? Can you kidnap the other 5 people besides Li Yuanzhu?" The Empress said coldly. "Moreover, it's hard to say whether they can beat me. Even if they aren't strong, they definitely can't be too weak. This person is frail and can never have an heir with you," someone said. "Our imperial treasury can't push someone to the earth wheel level? What a joke." The Empress sneered. This. Everyone was speechless. If the Empress wanted to, she could definitely push a fool to the earth wheel level in a short period of time. Although an earth wheel expert wasn't considered strong, it was possible for him to have an heir. But this person's origin is unknown, someone tried to say. "So what if his origin is unknown? What are you afraid of?" The Empress asked. What was there to be afraid of? Everyone was just trying to find a reason to make the Empress retract her order. Even if he was an earth wheel expert, the Empress could kill him with a wave of her hand. What was there to be afraid of? However, after the Empress said this, they couldn't possibly say, "I just want you to change to another one, right? You have to find a reason, right? He looks exactly like the 7th Prince of Great Xia." It's hard to believe that he isn't related. Your Majesty should be more cautious. If he's really a member of the royal family of Great Xia and Her Majesty chooses him as a son-in-law, I'm afraid it'll be detrimental to Dayo, someone else advised. The royal family of Great Xia doesn't have the ability to do so. Naturally, I can prove that he has nothing to do with Great Xia. The Empress waved her hand. The royal family of Great Xia couldn't allow a person to suddenly appear and disappear. Also, his messy things and words weren't from Great Xia. Everyone objected for a long time, but in the end, they were unable to sway the Empress. Seeing this, Hongwu took a step forward and said, "Your Majesty, I don't have to object, but I wonder what you see in him?" The Empress stretched out her fair fingers and gently stroked her chin. "I don't hate it." This was the Empress's answer. At the end of the day it could be summed up in 3 words, "I don't hate it." The Empress was very clear that she had to find someone to give birth to an heir. However, how many men in the world were worthy of her? Others only knew that she was number 7 in the world, but now that she was ranked again, it was hard to say how many people were in front of her. Even if there were, those few would be over 50 years old. Since she became her current position at the age of 16, other than the court officials and imperial guards, how many people had she interacted with? Needless to say, the aboriginals kept quiet out of fear when they saw her. As for the foreigners that she saw during the birthday celebrations every year, it was hard for her to be interested. Even though Ren Baqin was weak, at least he made her feel that he was interesting. He could cry miserably, talk and perform a bunch of tricks. Not to mention he was pretty fun. To her, who was already at the top, strength and status weren't important. In any case, he wasn't as good as her and wasn't worthy of her attention. In her eyes, he wasn't even as good as pretty fun. And those candies, she liked them very much. That mirror, she liked them very much. That sentence, she liked them very much. When a person did a few things that she liked, she would have a good impression of him. It would also save others from bothering her. Hongwu looked at the Empress with an indescribable complex feeling. He really didn't want Her Majesty to choose that fellow, just like how no father would want his daughter to marry a wretch. With his strength and status, how could he possibly like Ren Baqin? However, for the past few years, the Empress hadn't been interested in him at all. Just as Hongwu was worrying about this, the Empress unexpectedly chose him and gave the reason, "I don't hate him. Your Majesty, in my opinion, why don't you arrange a position for him first? When he reaches the Earth Wheel level, if you think it's okay, you can appoint him as a prince," Hongwu said after a moment of silence. Sir Hongwu. Everyone was shocked as they didn't expect him to say this. I also agree with General-in-Chief who supports the nation. Shi Qing, who had been silent for the whole night, stepped forward and said, "Then it's decided. Disperse." The Empress immediately made the decision. Since Hongwu and Shi Qing had said so and the Empress had already made the decision, the others had no choice but to pinch their noses and accept it. After the crowd dispersed, the court officials surrounded Hongwu and Shi Qing as soon as they left the palace. "Sir, is Her Majesty really going to choose that fellow as her son-in-law?" Chapter 124. Ren Baqin looked at the room he was in and was speechless. Was he being robbed? Why didn't anyone ask for his opinion? Even though he didn't dare to say no. How was he going to clean up this mess? Escape? That was impossible. At the very least, he wouldn't be able to escape. He was unfamiliar with this place. Even if he left the palace, where could he run to? He wouldn't even know his way out of Lan City. If he were to escape like this, he would probably be caught within a day. Ren Baqin didn't know how long he was in a daze. He heard footsteps and the door was pushed open. The Empress stood at the door and looked at him. Then she sat down at the table in the room. "Your Majesty." Ren Baqin quickly got up. The Empress nodded her head slightly. Then the room fell into a short silence. Ren Baqin had a lot to say, but he didn't dare to say a word. "What do you want to say?" the Empress suddenly asked. Ren Baqin was slightly stunned. He didn't expect the Empress to ask him this question. As I said before, if the heavens didn't give birth to Your Majesty, it would be like an eternal night. Your Majesty's grace is unparalleled. I'm extremely grateful to be loved by someone like Your Majesty. I'm willing to go through fire and water for Your Majesty. It's just that I'm also afraid. I can't do anything for Dayo and I'm like a firefly in front of the blazing sun. How can I be worthy of Your Majesty's love?" Ren Baqin thought it over and over again and decided to offer some flattery first before saying anything else. If he could, he wanted to belittle himself as a bug in a smelly ditch. The Empress looked at him, nodded her head and said, You don't look so annoying and I like to listen to your words. It's you then. Rinpoche was speechless. Did he flatter her too much? Since you know that you're weak, follow me to the second level of Qingshin Palace Hall tomorrow to choose a martial arts manual. You must reach Earth level. If I'm not satisfied with your progress, you know the consequences. The Empress looked at him and said, Yes, Your Majesty. Rinpoche didn't know whether he should be happy or sad. Originally, he wanted to look for Du Changkong to exchange martial arts manuals. In the end, his plan couldn't keep up with the changes. Now there was no need for it. He could just go to Qingshin Palace Hall to get it. The martial arts manuals there were definitely better than Du Changkong's. If you feel like you haven't done anything, then show me what you know. I have something to ask you. Do you know how to forge weapons to equip our Aboriginal warriors? Rinpoche hesitated for a moment. Right now he had two choices. The first was to conceal his strength, but there were no benefits. There were a lot of disadvantages. For example, in the eyes of others, he only knew how to flatter others and was not favored by others. If his cultivation progress did not reach the standard in the future, his treatment would also be worrying. Before he was brought in, he would have been extremely unwilling to do so. However, if he were to be chased out after being brought in, his fate would probably be even more miserable. Since that was the case, he could only choose the second option. He had to do everything well so that he could stand firm. As for the rest, it would depend on his cultivation progress. He immediately raised his head and said to the Empress, I wonder if there are any iron mines in Dayo? If we don't have iron ore, it's useless even if we have a method. There are 2 of them, but their output is limited. Many people are injured every year. Furthermore, it's very difficult to refine the iron ores that are pulled back. The Empress was very pleased to see that he really had a solution. I have a method to refine iron ores. As for whether the output can be increased, I'm afraid I will only know after seeing it in person, Rinpoche continued. The Empress nodded her head slightly. If Rinpoche had a method, at least the shortage of weapons would be reduced. After which, she threw a token to Rinpoche and said, With this token, you can go anywhere in the palace except for the treasury, arsenal, and a few other places. Tomorrow you will follow me to Qingshin Palace Hall. After she finished speaking, she immediately left the house. After the Empress left, Rinpoche collapsed on the bed. Until now he still felt as if he was in a dream. After a long while, he got up and opened up the things that were placed beside him. Inside were all the things that he brought back from Earth. At this moment, Rinpoche suddenly remembered something. He was going back to Earth tonight. How was he going to follow the Empress to Qingshin Palace Hall tomorrow? He was afraid that the Empress would send someone to discover that he was missing tomorrow. She wouldn't think that he had run away, right? Rinpoche used all his strength to hit himself. Just now, his mind was in a mess and he had forgotten about this matter. What should he do now? Even though the Empress was well aware that he had disappeared once every 3 days, it was different this time. In the past, the Empress was far away from him. She had the heart of an empress and turned a blind eye to it. Now that he had disappeared on the first night of entering the palace, it was hard to say what the Empress would think. What should he do? Should he look for the Empress now? Rinpoche walked around the house a few times and rummaged through his pile of things. Finally, he took out his camera and pondered whether he should send her a gift again. After thinking about it, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to get away with his current situation. It was better to be honest with the Empress. After all, he was in the palace now and it was only a matter of time before she found out. Every word I said is true and comes from the bottom of my heart. If God has arranged for me to stay by your Majesty's side for a period of time, I hope it will be 10,000 years. After Rinpoche finished speaking, he could clearly feel the Empress withdrawing her aura. If I find out that you lied to me, you know the consequences, the Empress said. Her pair of phoenix eyes were filled with an indescribable look. Even though she was the Empress, she had never heard such words before. Her gaze toward Rinpoche became gentler and gentler. It's just that I really can't control my movements, so I'll have to go back tonight. However, I feel that it's also a good thing to go back. I can help your Majesty find something worthy of your Majesty. Pour me some wine, the Empress said. Rinpoche nimbly filled the wine cup beside him and passed it to the Empress. After seeing that she had finished drinking, he filled another cup for her. Remember your words, the Empress said again. How can I not remember? Even if I lose my life, I will still look up to your Majesty from the netherworld, Rinpoche said. Drink this cup of wine. The empress immediately handed the wine cup over. Rinpoche looked at the wine cup in the empress's hand and thought that this was an indirect kiss, right? However, his hands didn't slow down. After receiving the wine cup, he drank it in one gulp. He felt that there seemed to be a fragrant aroma in the wine. I will remember your words. Go back and look for me the day after tomorrow, the empress said. I will take my leave. Rinpoche placed the wine cup at the side, bowed to the empress and left. When he walked out of the door, he saw Qing Yuan and Hong Luan standing not far away. Greetings to the two ladies. Rinpoche cupped his hands toward them. Greetings to storyteller Ren. Both of them bowed as well. Today, Rinpoche was no longer just a storyteller. Even if their attitude toward him wasn't like how they treated the empress, it was still much better than before. Rinpoche found the imperial guard outside and asked him to bring him back to his previous room. After closing the door, Rinpoche went back to his bed and thought about the empress's every move just now. He remembered the change in the empress's attitude. So far it seemed that he had done a good job. He wasn't too sure about other things, but Rinpoche could see that the empress liked to listen to flattering words. This was normal. Since ancient times, who hadn't been like this? Even those famous emperors in history couldn't escape. Therefore even the empress was like this. No matter what, she was only a 23-year-old woman. Although her position as an empress was different, she was far superior to ordinary people in many aspects, such as the mind and vision of an empress, the governance of the country and personal strength. However, all these couldn't hide the fact that she was only a 23-year-old woman. He spent the entire morning looking up information, so he didn't pay much attention to the time. Fortunately, Rinpoche had found most of the information. Furthermore, Rinpoche had also selected some of them. It should be able to be built in Dayo. He just had to find a place to print it out when he returned. After going out for lunch, he went to the supermarket and bought all kinds of candies and chocolates. This time he didn't just buy White Rabbit creamy candies. He also bought some from Su Fuji. He also bought a box of liquor, Red Star Erguoto and Nulanshin Erguoto. Even though it was an ordinary bottle, it was much better than the strong alcohol that the empress drank from the Yun nation. After moving these things back to the carriage, the empress's preparations were more than half complete. However, Rinpoche felt that he should still buy other things that could interest her. Then he went to a special gift shop and bought a clockwork music box. There was a crystal ball on top, a crystal merry-go-round inside, and the music was city in the sky. At the very least it looked sparkling and translucent. Young girls might like it. The price was also very cheap, less than 200 yuan. I wonder if she will be interested, Rinpoche thought as he walked with the music box in his hand. Inexplicably, he felt like he was buying a gift for a girl that he had a crush on. Unfortunately, it wasn't. He had never done that kind of thing before. It seemed that he had liked a girl when he was in junior high, but he had never spoken about it. Up until now, he couldn't even remember what she looked like. Such an inexplicable thought surfaced in his mind, but he immediately suppressed it. It was just a moment of reverie. When he returned, the housekeeper had already left. After putting the things aside, Rinpoche took his phone and sat on the sofa. In the past, he would immediately look at his phone after returning home. Now he couldn't recall anything. There weren't many people looking for him. Even Qin himself had reduced his contact. The only people he really needed to contact were his parents and family. Mom, did you call me? Rinpoche looked at his phone before calling her back. The girl that I told you about previously is currently staying at your place. She just went there not long ago. If you have the chance, help her out. Even if you are not fated to be with her, you can still be friends with her. Don't think that just because you have some money now, you won't be able to find someone to help you in the future. Once the call was connected, he was immediately hit in the face. I got it. Send me the phone number. Rinpoche put the phone away from his ear and waited for the other side's voice to become softer before replying. I have already sent the phone number and name to you. Hurry up and contact her. His mother reminded him again. I got it. Rinpoche really wanted to say, don't play matchmaker for no reason. Actually, your son likes men. However, if he did that, his parents would probably come here tonight. He threw his phone aside and didn't even take a look at the WeChat message from his mother. What did that someone's daughter or niece have to do with him? He had enough things to deal with now and really didn't have the mood to care about others. For the next 2 days, other than going out to print some documents, Rinpoche had been cooped up in the house. During this period he diligently tidied up the bedroom. It couldn't be helped. His slippers left footprints on the floor. He didn't know why it was so dirty with the windows closed. 2 days later, when Rinpoche woke up again, he was already back in that unfamiliar room in the palace. The things that he wanted to bring were all beside him. There were a total of 2 boxes of 24 bottles of wine, a music box, a stack of printed documents and a pile of milk candies. Rinpoche pushed open the door and saw a new imperial guard at the door. "Can I see Her Majesty now?" Rinpoche asked. "I'm afraid Her Majesty is in court now. Storyteller Rin will have to wait for a while." The imperial guard turned around and replied. From that night onwards, everyone that he met first swept a glance at him from head to toe. Rinpoche was already used to this kind of gaze. Only when it was almost noon did the imperial guard come to inform him, "Storyteller Rin, Her Majesty wants to see you. Please help me move my things." "Thank you." Rinpoche followed the principle that it would be a waste if he didn't use someone. The imperial guard carried the 2 boxes of wine while Rinpoche brought the candy and crystal ball into the hall. The empress was standing in front of the mirror and Qin Yuan was helping her to tie up her hair. Rinpoche gestured to the imperial guard to place the things on the floor. He then walked forward and said, "No matter how Her Majesty dresses up, her looks will be unparalleled and make others feel ashamed of their inferiority. Thank God for Lan Yao rewarding the sect leader." Chapter 1. There was a table that was at least 3 to 4 meters long. The empress sat at the head of the table while Rinpoche stood at the side with his hands hanging by his side. "Take a seat." "Thank you, Your Majesty." Rinpoche then sat down nearby. "Tell me, what's China like? I'm very curious. I wonder what the world beyond the heavens looks like." Rinpoche pondered for a while and asked, "Which aspect would Your Majesty like to hear about? What do the Chinese powerhouses look like?" Rinpoche pondered for a while and felt that it wasn't easy to bring up this topic. The strongest person in China was probably equivalent to an aboriginal commoner. At most they were slightly stronger. "Your Majesty, every world has its own set of rules and scenery. In China, strength was not determined by strength but by intelligence, wisdom, and knowledge. We manufactured all kinds of equipment. There are vehicles that can run without horsepower and are as fast as lightning. There are planes that can carry people in the sky. Furthermore, the internet allows people to instantly know what's happening thousands of miles away. Individual bravery has been replaced by equipment. Firearms can take a person's life from thousands of steps away, and they can fire more than 10 times in an instant. Cannons can attack from a distance where the human eye can't see, and nuclear weapons can destroy a city from thousands of miles away." Destroy a city from thousands of miles away? There's actually such a thing in this world? The empress was slightly surprised. Rinpoche looked up at the empress's surprised expression and smiled. "Even though the people on Earth are weak in martial arts, they can still shock you with their various technologies. Indeed, the area within a 5-kilometer radius is like purgatory. There are no humans or animals left. Such weapons are too powerful and are prohibited from being used." "Such a lethal weapon should be prohibited," the empress muttered. "Yes, as I said before, the Chinese use intelligence, wisdom, and knowledge to determine a person's status. According to the different interests and abilities of an individual, a variety of social divisions have been developed. By combining the wisdom of many people, the goal is to make life more convenient, explore the mysteries of the world, and understand the nature of the world. Our society is more stable and the lives of the people are more prosperous. Even though there are rich and poor people, the majority of the ordinary people can be said to be well off. For example, basic necessities like food, clothing, housing, and transportation aren't things that most people need to consider. What most people consider is how to obtain a better life. The human heart is always insatiable," the empress said faintly. "The human heart is always insatiable. They want to obtain more and no more. Only then will the whole world improve. Otherwise, it will become a pool of stagnant water." Rinpoche briefly told the empress about China, but he tried his best to talk about it in a positive way. After all, he also had the thought of not washing one's dirty linen in public. Just like on Earth, if your country was rich and powerful, you would receive more respect abroad. Even though it depended on the individual, the strength of a country was also a plus for a person in a foreign country. Being backed by a strong country and being backed by a weak country were 2 completely different things. Even though he didn't have much influence here, he was still willing to talk about China in a good way. While they were talking, the dishes were served. Rinpoche didn't say anything else. Instead, he got up and poured a glass of wine for the empress. The Empress took a sniff and drank it in one gulp. Then she nodded and said, "Not bad." From the expression on her face, one could tell that she liked it very much. "If there's enough food, this kind of wine can be brewed," Rinpoche said. "I will leave this matter to you. In a while, follow me to Qingshin Palace Hall to choose a martial arts manual. After you have a foundation, I will send someone to see if you can increase the production of the iron mine and how to improve the smelting of iron. After that, you can brew the wine." "I don't need a lot, just enough for the palace to drink," the Empress said after thinking for a while. Rinpoche nodded. This matter wasn't difficult. In fact, Dayo wasn't lacking in food, but most of it was meat, vegetables and rice. Therefore the Empress didn't dare to brew too much. "Actually, we can brew wine and exchange it with the Yin Nation, the Qin Nation and Great Xia for food, salt and even ironware. This kind of high-alcohol wine will definitely have a considerable market in those two nations. I just don't know the standard of the wine in the palace banquet in those two nations?" Rinpoche asked. During the banquet that day, the wine in the palace was much better than the wine that caretaker Sure brought out. However, it was still inferior to the high-alcohol wine on earth in terms of taste, color and other aspects. Rinpoche wanted to know the standard of the wine in the other nations. "It's considered high grade." "That's right. If we can brew wine that's better than theirs, we can sell it to other nations at a high price. Then we can buy the necessities we need. Things that others don't have but need will be of high value. There has always been a huge market for things like wine." Rinpoche laughed. It was as difficult as ascending to heaven to achieve a clear mind. However, the idea of having a clear mind made him think of two religions. Taoism and Buddhism had great attainments in the cultivation of the mind. Perhaps he could seek guidance from them first. Perhaps he would gain something. Chapter 130. After leaving Qingshin Palace Hall, Rinpoche returned to Pingle Park. When he came back, he found out the name of this courtyard after asking around. After entering the house, he closed the door and opened the windows. Then he sat in front of the table and placed a thick book made of animal hide on the table. He was a little excited. After all, this was a martial arts manual from this world, and it should be of a very high grade. Otherwise, it wouldn't be placed on the second floor. This wasn't the 10 palms of the subduing dragon that could be found in a street stall. He didn't know what kind of leather the book was made of. It gave off a feeling that it was very old and had experienced many years. However, the book wasn't damaged or even worn out. Rinpoche carefully opened the book. On the first page there was a drawing of a lake. Some of the surrounding corners could be seen as land, as well as some scattered weeds and trees. Although it was just a few strokes, the charm was completely outlined. It was as if a gust of water vapor was blowing against his face. There was a line of small words below. However, after looking at it for a long time, Rinpoche could only recognize one word. If he didn't guess wrongly, it should be water. After all, there were many similarities between hieroglyphs. However, he was at a loss for the other words. Every word was like a drawing. The Empress didn't ask about his progress and he had forgotten about it. Seems like I still have to learn how to read. At least I have to find someone to translate this book. Rinpoche pondered and flipped a few pages. On the second page there were many small words. On the third page there was a forest. On the fourth page there were many more small words. Rinpoche continued to flip to the next page. It was a page of pictures and a page of words. There were a total of 9 pictures. After the 18th page there were 5 or 6 pages full of words. The last page was another picture. Forget it, I can't understand anything. If I can learn it just by looking at pictures, then it's simply a joke. Rinpoche carried the book and went to Qingshin Palace Hall. This Rui visualization shouldn't be a problem for Lin Xiaola to read, but not for other people. Therefore he still had to look for that girl who was always sleeping. With the token that the Empress threw at him that day, he wouldn't be affected by most places in the palace as long as he didn't get lost. Occasionally he would meet maids along the way. They would look at Rinpoche curiously before quickly leaving. After all, this was the first time they encountered such a situation. They didn't know what to do and could only keep a distance. When he opened the door of Qingshin Palace Hall, Lin Xiaola was still dozing off and her face was plastered on the table. Apart from the few days when Rinpoche was learning how to read, she would sleep for at least 20 hours out of the 24 hours a day. Furthermore, because there was no qi, even if he learned other techniques he wouldn't be able to execute them. When Rinpoche first found out about this characteristic, he thought that practicing this technique would allow him to become as strong as the Aboriginals. However, Lin Xiaola's words dispelled his thoughts. This was because the Aboriginals actually stimulated and unearthed the power of their bloodlines to achieve breakthroughs in their bodies. It could be said that this technique was completely different from the current techniques. It was completely unconventional. As for the techniques after the Earth embryo realm, according to the description, it was on the last diagram, which was also a visualization diagram. The diagram depicted a ferocious-looking man with 18 arms. Rinpoche couldn't tell what the Earth embryo realm would be like. He reckoned that he would only know after cultivating to that stage and visualizing that diagram. According to Lin Xiaola's reply to librarian Lin, this Rui visualization was found in the library of the Hao Nation's royal family. Even in the Hao Nation, no one had practiced this technique before. It was difficult to get started with this technique. Not only did it consume a lot of energy, but one would also be the weakest among those at the same level and could only rely on one's physical strength to bully others. What was the point of practicing this technique? After all, those who could enter the Hao Nation's library would not lack techniques. Do you still want to practice this? Lin Xiaola asked casually as she ate her candy. Rinpoche was a little hesitant. These few days he more or less understood some things from Lin Xiaola's words. Martial arts weren't cabbages, it wasn't like choosing a major in a university, and it wasn't something that could be changed after a few years of practice. For other martial arts, if one reached a certain level, such as attaining the earth wheel level, one could change to a compatible martial art. However, this Rui visualization was different. It was different from all the other martial arts. Even if one wanted to change it, one couldn't. If he chose it, he would have to walk on this path until the end. As for what would happen after the pinnacle of the earth wheel level, no one knew. It was completely unknown. If he didn't choose this technique, he would have to practice great pan boxing first. Then he would have to wait for the Empress to find another martial art for him. One could imagine the difficulty of this task. There were so many books in the entire Qingxin Palace Hall. After inheriting the original library of the Hao Nation, there were still many books that were added later on. Yet, only 2 books were suitable for him. If he were to search elsewhere, would he be able to find a suitable one in a short period of time? And in the process of searching, how big of a storm would he create? Even if the Empress was willing, he didn't dare to let her do this. With this thought, Rinpoche felt that he had no other choice. He could only choose this Rui visualization, and walk on this path until the end. The prerequisite was that he could get started with it. As for combat power, he simply didn't consider it at all. He wasn't going to fight for no reason. If he was weaker than others, then so be it. At the very least, he would be stronger than his current self. Furthermore, there were rifles, grenades, RPGs, and all kinds of lethal weapons on Earth. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.